As he's
It's
on, everybody.
that is what it is. That's what it does.
Okay, as you'll know,
Yeah.
I live in a very old house, right? At least for this country.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Caveat.
whoa now. So
Uh,
like a new build as far as we're concerned then.
it's older than your house, okay?
Okay.
I live in an old house, it's a century old. And when we first moved in here 5 years ago, we moved into the basement because it was a finished basement at the time. Obviously, anyone who's been listening to this for a minute knows then a hurricane came and destroyed our little basement apartment. So we don't live down there anymore. But Mark, you'll probably remember when you came here, I showed you around,
Yeah.
and there was like a little weird back room that Keo
Yeah.
kept his stuff in,
I
his
don't think
little.
I conveyed at the time through not wanting to appear like masculine and tough. But your basement fucking absolutely gave me the GBs like you wouldn't believe. It is the vibes are awful in that basement.
That's not,
Something
I mean, that is
atrocious has happened there.
certainly not the worst. Like the basement that I grew up in when I was a kid is like was the most I mean, I didn't grow up in the basement. In the house I grew up in, I just was like, just my Harry Potter backstory right here.
I just
No,
got visions of everyone in America living in Home
we
Alone basements.
exactly just like
Yeah.
a furnace, just like when we go down there. No, the one that in the house I grew up in was deeply terrifying, just like spider webs and dirt everywhere. Like at least this has like walls and shit like normal places. But anyway, not the point. There's a room towards the back of this that my husband uses as like a little office sort of situation. And he keeps junk back there. And there's a pipe in it that one day he was like, "Hey, Corey, come in here for a sec." And I was like, "Okay." And I come back and he's like, "Look at this." And there's like some sort of material on it that had like threads coming out of it and stuff like that. And he was like, "Do you think that's asbestos?" And I was
Oh
like,
no.
I have never seen asbestos, I don't think. And so I open up the Google machine and I look, and sure enough, it's asbestos wrapped around this pipe that is in here. And so, he goes and he gets stuff and he wraps a whole bunch of shit around it, a bunch of duct tape and everything, so that there's not asbestos floating all over the place. And he goes and he looks around to make sure none of the other pipes have them. None anywhere else. It's
Do you know,
just
you
this
had
one
like a
pipe.
full respiratory breakdown, didn't you? At one
I
point during
did.
that year.
Yes, I do have chronic bronchitis, but things like that it's iffy thinking about that.
Mm.
It was also very far from where I ever was. Again, this is a corner thing completely closed off from the rest of the basement, which is probably why nobody noticed that it was there. Like, if there's asbestos and everything else, it had long since been removed, but this little room that nobody ever goes in had this little like 8-inch bit of asbestos on it.
What was the pipe?
I think it's just like a water pipe. Like
Okay.
just like there's a bunch of those going through. Our house has, like it's heated by
Uh,
hot water,
I dare say you're gonna come back to this with a "we'll get there"
Mm.
mark, but
probably.
what's
Yeah,
the
but go
kind of
on.
legality of asbestos in the States? Because you simply can't have it in your home here, can you, Bennis? Is that right?
We'll
No, no,
get
no, no.
there.
Yeah.
We'll get there, Mark.
Here we go.
On
Okay.
both cases here. Um, but this was an interesting moment for me because, like I said, I'd never seen asbestos. And I remember passively sort of thinking, like, what is that even for? Like, why is that a thing we would have in our house on this pipe? But it's also just one of those things that you like hear about all the time, and I
Mm.
never gave it much thought. I don't know if you have these, but here there are always these commercials with lawyers telling you that if you have a cancer called mesothelioma, you can get in touch with them so that you can be part of lawsuits against companies that use asbestos. Do you have those?
Not we don't get that. So not like in the States. Like we don't
Nah,
lawyer adverts just don't make it onto the
nah, they don't.
TV.
The
Doesn't
Okay,
mean they
closest
don't
we came
exist.
sure.
for a
P
while, for what
PPI,
felt like,
right?
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And for a few years there in the noughties or thereabouts, like injury lawyers for you That
Yeah,
kind of
yeah.
thing was really just everywhere. We had what's his fucking name? Lovejoy, Shane,
Oh,
Ian
Oh,
the
McShane,
Ian
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 McShane,
McShane.
McShane,
yeah.
right? We're real lawyers, and we're here to get the best deal for you. That he was plugging in Real Lawyers for You for a while, which I was very fond of. But no, not for specific cases. When my family and I went to the Caribbean a couple of years back, like as you know, the evenings were spent watching game show TV, and I was
Yeah.
very enamored at some particular class action lawsuit which was on every single advertisement break for like military wives who'd been affected by like a radioactive lake or something.
Oh. Oh, that's
That sounds
interesting.
like a
Did
cold open for the
I
future.
know,
it
right?
does
Seriously, how
you
have
know
I not
did
talked about
did
that
did
yet?
your husband come into contact with radiation from this lake? Then if so, call 555.
Interesting. You
Yeah,
know, there's every chance that I may have seen this, but as you have seen, it's very, our commercials are so all over the place. It's very
they're
easy to tune them
great.
out after a while.
Yeah.
I would find that tough. I love American ads, as you know.
Oh,
Oh
they're
boy,
incredible. I'm
don't I
I'm
They
going to
know
are
be
it.
there.
wild.
I'm in America Friday, and I'm looking forward to just
Oh,
seeing some
wonderful.
TV. So yeah,
Amazing.
but
Excellent.
no, the asbestos thing here though was a big deal, and it kind
It
of went.
was.
It kicked off in the I guess late 80s,
Wait,
90s,
wait,
and
wait,
went.
hold on. I'm going to
We'll
tell
get
you a
there.
story
Oh,
here.
words. We're
I've
getting
got
to
more
it.
to
We'll get there.
say.
We'll get
We'll
there. We'll
get
get there.
there. Yeah, we'll get there, John. Welcome to the show.
I'm just doing my best Mark impression.
Yeah,
Yes, well, fellas,
I can step back. This is
I'm
good. This is good.
I'm going to tell you a little bit about the history of asbestos and why it became such a societal menace. And then I'm going to tell you about a couple of towns haunted by what one documentary I watched referred to as the evil dust.
Uh,
So,
oh,
while asbestos is naturally occurring and had been used in many ancient cultures, it began being manufactured in the late 19th century in Canada, of all places. And asbestos is like this super soft and silky material, but when you sort of pack it together and the way that it comes like out of mines and whatnot, it's incredibly solid. So it's got that kind of two different texture things going on that's really appealing. And they called it
mm.
the magic mineral at the time. It was sought after because of its resistance to heat and chemicals and water, and its high tensile strength. Like I said, when put together, this shit is strong as fuck. You could use it for all kinds of construction. They would make firefighting suits out of it, and manufacture of this became a huge employer, which should already make you go like, oh no, because we remember, for example, the radium girls that I talked about
Sure.
a year or two ago. It's never great when there's a hugely dangerous substance and they've got people working up close and personal with it. Odds are they probably didn't tell them they were working with a hugely
Well, it was a
dangerous
different time,
substance.
wasn't it?
Different time. I mean, it's fine. It was
Yeah.
cool to sacrifice some ladies for
Yeah.
a cool looking watch back in the day.
Thalidomide,
Thalidomide, right? You
different
know.
days.
Listen, no morning sickness, baby without arms.
Yes.
Who can say which is the better choice? So the working conditions in asbestos manufacture were super dusty, like deeply dusty. One historian explained, quote, workers couldn't see more than 6 to 10 feet in certain parts of the factories. And dust was common in a lot of mines and factories at the time, so people didn't necessarily think of this as like a super problematic thing. It was just, it is what it is. Of course, most factories and mines were also super dangerous in their own ways at the time.
Mm.
So it's not like great either way, but this wasn't necessarily a red flag in and of itself. But just to imagine yourself in one of these factories, 6 to 10 feet, and you're seeing a wall of fog basically from how much dust there is in here.
Asbestos fog at that.
Asbestos fog, exactly. And in 1898, an inspector coined that term, the evil dust, when she came into one of the factories and was like, Jesus Christ, there's a bunch of people who work in here who are getting lung disease from whatever the hell is going on in here. 1898, right? As I told you, this began being manufactured at the end of the 19th century. It is the end of the 19th century, and already they've got inspectors coming into British factories and going, hey, what the fuck? This seems like it's killing people. In 1906, a French inspector discovered that 50 women had died as a result of working with asbestos. So they stopped using it, obviously. Just kidding. They were like duly noted and carried on employing people in factories that were killing them. Again, 1906. 1906. By 1918 in the US, I just want to point out this is happening. My house was built in 1922. So they knew this was killing people before they put that pipe into my house, just for perspective here. So by 1918, in the US and Canada, as more and more reports were coming out about the health costs of asbestos, rather than reduce people's contact with it, the company started circling the wagons to figure out how they could avoid responsibility for whatever happened to people that came in contact with it. Among the steps taken was to make it so that asbestos workers couldn't get insurance, as they were guaranteed to need expensive care that the companies didn't want to have to pay for. It's basically exactly what's happening with the fires in Southern California. Like, hey, we fucked up the planet and now it's on fire all the time. So now we're just not going to insure your house. That's what was happening here. They were like, we're giving everyone asbestos problems. So in order to avoid having to like do anything about that, we're just going to make it so that they're not covered and we don't have to pay for whatever happens to them.
I mean, it only felt like maybe the 1980s or late 70s that it was outlawed over here.
Mark.
Okay, I'm just...
We will get there. Okay. Just settle in for the journey, my dear friend.
Breathe in the dust and go with it.
Breathe in the dust, man. You know?
Nice.
A small shift occurred with the highly publicized death of a woman named Nellie Kershaw. Kershaw worked at a place called Turner Brothers in Rochdale.
Yes.
Okay. Very nice. Yes. Very nice.
Very nicely done.
Oh.
Very nice.
Hey, whew. I was very not sure about that one, as you could tell.
Gonna get your pronunciation sticker for today.
Excellent.
Crushed it. But she worked there and she died in 1924. Hers was the first asbestos death into which there was an actual inquest. And the newspapers covered the whole thing. Her lungs were found to have been coated in tiny glass-like fibers that cut into them, leaving scars that eventually made it impossible for her to breathe, leading to her suffocating to death from her own scar tissue.
Yes.
Horrifying.
Here we go. Here Absolutely we fucking
go. Naturally, the company she worked for was like, fuck off, that's not our fault. And no one in her family was compensated for it. As Jeffrey Tweedale put it, quote, she had a disease that didn't exist. In other words, since the company refused to acknowledge that asbestos was the culprit, whatever killed her was just some kind of medical anomaly. No one to blame. Lungs just decided to suffocate her. It happens. The company wouldn't even cover funeral expenses because that would be admitting some form of responsibility, which could set a precedent for future lawsuits or even just for similar requests. Their employees were dropping like flies. They didn't want to have to pay for all those funerals. The findings of Nellie's case were published 3 years later alongside research into over 300 other workers in the same factory. It was found that 17 out of 20 people who had been working there for more than 20 years suffered from the same scarring as Nellie, and they were finally given a name for the thing they were suffering and dying from: asbestosis. Approve of the name?
Yeah, nice.
It became
That's what it says on the tin, I think, doesn't it?
Right on the fucking button.
Right. It's not the last time that we'll find a very on-the-nose name like that in this story.
Considering it doesn't exist, it's quite interesting. Yeah. Straight to the point.
Hang on.
Yeah.
It became clear that legislation was going to be necessary if anything was to be done about this, because the companies were completely uninterested in doing the right thing for these people. Again, this had become like a hugely profitable industry at this point. They were making money hand over fist, and they did not want to do anything to slow that down in any way. Regulation is amongst the things that would slow that down.
I don't know how much how I don't even know how full an answer I want to this, really, right? Okay. But was there like one company at the tip of the asbestos pyramid? Like big asbestos? Was there like one
Big
kind of mining
asbestos.
firm?
It depended on where you were. There were various different companies that were, owned the mines and stuff like that. Often ones that did other things, as we'll see when we get to the story I will tell you a little bit later on. So often it wasn't necessarily a company that was like just asbestos. It was like, we do this and this. Like thalidomide, right? Like the
Exactly,
companies
yeah.
that made thalidomide like were not pharmaceutical companies or anything like
And
that.
the wasn't there a pesticides that we spoke about
Yeah.
at one point? That
Right.
kind of
Yeah,
thing. Yeah.
exactly. So yeah, there's nothing that's like going to be a name that you recognize now or anything like that, I don't think.
Mm.
Especially because as I will get to, a lot of those companies went bankrupt later on, sort of deliberately.
I'm gonna say good.
And started making energy drinks.
Right, yeah. They now make Prime.
Yeah,
So
exactly. Yeah.
but yeah. So they decided that they did need the government realized they needed to do some sort of regulation. So a new law was adopted in 1931 to compensate people who suffered illness as a result of exposure to asbestos in the workplace. However, it was super influenced by the industry itself. They had their hands in all that regulation. Again, this all relates to everything, at least going on in the United States with regulation of shit. It's like every time they try to regulate something, the companies that we're trying to regulate are the ones like doing all the stuff to get it done. So the law ended up only applying to people who were most heavily exposed to asbestos in the plants. That meant that people who worked in like shipyards, for example, where asbestos was used, but they weren't actively manufacturing asbestos, weren't covered by any of these regulations. So they could just, carry on using asbestos in those places with no sort of recourse for anyone who got sick as a result of that. So even as people knew asbestos was a killer, they increasingly started using it for all kinds of cutesy things like tablecloths and home siding, putting out little infomercials and ads encouraging people to use this highly customizable and fireproof material for all their household needs, especially in the United States. In 1948, American asbestos companies commissioned a study which ended up finding that asbestos was giving people cancer and tumors. They then told the authors of the study to just go ahead and omit that from the findings. Again, not the first time that we've seen this shit, as cigarette companies and oil companies did the same things with lung cancer and climate change, respectively. If you pay for the studies, you can make the studies say whatever you want them to say. And that's exactly what they did. In the 1960s, a South African doctor found that there was a specific cancer that only came from asbestos. Mesothelioma. Doesn't only come from asbestos, but it's the leading cause of it, right? And you could get it from a very minimal amount of exposure. Days, weeks, months, just really short periods of exposure. So if it was in your house...
Days, did you say?
Days. Yes, days of exposure. So if it was in your house, I mean, fuck, right? Although by unfortunate irony, your risk of inhaling asbestos is a lot higher if you try to get rid of it in your house than if you just leave it alone. Which is why Keo just wrapped ours up instead of like trying to remove it from the house. So if you have it, if you find asbestos in your house, don't try to get rid of it. Have a professional do it or wrap that shit up. But we've got a thin layer of tissue that covers our organs called mesothelium. And asbestos causes cancer cells to grow in that layer. This most often occurs around the lungs and the heart, which are places you really don't want cancer to grow. Like you hear about cancer like starting somewhere and metastasizing to the lungs or something, but like if it starts there, you're kind of fucked, right? So at this point, it was becoming clear to the companies that they could be liable for not warning customers about the danger of the use of asbestos. So they put really wishy-washy warnings on asbestos products rather than pulling them all together. So you would just see stuff that's like, warning, asbestos may cause certain health defects if you, use this in the wrong way. So like heads up,
Back to the cigarettes thing, right? May
right,
cause lung
exactly.
disease.
It may cause. Like if you use them enough, chances are, yes, it's going to cause those things, right? But not taking full responsibility, just letting you know, there may be issues here. But at the same time that they were doing this, the industry was also spending tons of money running ads and commissioning articles that told how wonderful asbestos was and how safe it was to use. And the industry was so incredibly powerful and moneyed, they were able to influence what was written about it and get everyone to downplay the horrific dangers they'd known about, again, pretty much since it began being manufactured in the late 1800s. We're not talking about a product here where they used it for 50 years and then suddenly realized it was bad, right? They knew from the beginning of its manufacture, and yet it just got more and more popular to use. In fact, even the Romans had written about how enslaved people who worked in asbestos mines kept coming down with weird lung problems. It was a thing we've known since antiquity, and yet kept on doing this with. It's just wild to think about what lax regulations were like until very recent history. Asbestos wasn't fully banned in the EU, including the UK, till 2003. And only became fully banned in the US last year, 20
amazing,
and
amazing.
24.
That's what I was
Well
waiting for.
done.
That's what I wanted to hear.
Squeeze out every
2024.
penny first.
Yeah.
Very nice.
Right. You couldn't use it in most situations, but there were still loopholes that you could use them in. And honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if Trump was like, that's dumb. Let the babies mine asbestos.
On
and
day
got
one,
rid of it.
day
Yeah.
one.
Like if that
Could
wasn't
we-
in his
We'll get
executive order.
asbestos into every home.
We can inject it straight into the blood.
Every good, beautiful asbestos. Right. One of my early takeaways here, right, is you talked about like even back in the fucking early days, the glory days of asbestos, right? Back when it was cool and new. There wouldn't have been such huge capitalist interest in asbestos back then. So who benefited?
Like in Rome? Or in Canada in the late 19th century?
Rome.
Okay, in Rome. Gotcha. Go on.
No one's, like coining in loads of fucking denarii or whatever they used from homes using asbestos then. There's no kind of, why would they?
So it's a great building material, and like I said, resistant to fire. So they used it pretty much the same ways, right? They used it to build shit, and they used it for like pottery and things like that. The super hard material that didn't smash when when it dropped or things like that. So maybe a bit more frivolous in its uses. It wasn't for huge military uses or anything like that. They weren't building ships with it necessarily, but yeah, similar kind of uses for it. At the time.
We're saying the British Museum's got a chance of being full of asbestos
it
pottery.
may have asbestos all fucking through it for all we know. I don't know.
Brilliant.
I don't know how much they've checked to see what materials.
The joke's on them finally.
Right. Exactly.
Steal all that stuff and then.
Would you like some of the fun symptoms of asbestosis?
Sure. Yeah. Hit me with it. I'll let you have
go.
that one.
Of course, you know the stuff you'd expect: shortness of breath, cough, chest pain, and so on. But also, a common symptom of asbestosis is clubbing of the fingers. So fingers and toes become wider and rounder than normal. You get kind of
Prince Charles fingers.
Yes.
Exactly.
King Charles, sorry.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Royal fingers.
Royal fingers.
Abnormalities.
Royal fingers.
Crackling sounds when breathing. And huge, thick, clubbed fingers and toes. How good
Does
is
it
that?
say why that? Like, what's the
Turn into
mechanism?
Nosferatu.
You do.
Right.
Don't know. Who can say?
Okay, fair enough. Putting you on the spot there, but that is interesting.
Assume it's blood circulate. It's got to be circulatory.
It's got to be circulatory.
Heading around your heart, right?
And it is totally incurable.
Yes.
Absolutely no treatment can't be reversed or cured.
Yeah.
You got it.
I mean, even with like the mesothelioma commercials and stuff like that, it's very clear you're going to die from it. And they're basically looking to compensate your family. It's like, do you have this? Well, sorry, but once you're dead, let's make sure your family gets money for this. Like asbestos.
As questions occur to me,
dude. Yeah.
What's the situation with inheritance tax in the US?
What?
Well, so if I've got the asbestositis, and my my lung and heart tissues are all fucked and I'm breaking out in clubbed fingers and tumors, and I get a little bit of a payoff,
Sure.
will that get like horrifically taxed? I suspect yes.
That's a good question. Like I know that like obviously I've told you about getting an inheritance from my uncle recently.
Yeah,
And it was taxed, but he didn't like I want to say that there's a difference between like a lawsuit, winning a lawsuit and
fine.
like an inheritance.
Okay.
Um, I'm not positive though. I have never
Okay.
won a lawsuit, so I
Hmm.
cannot. I've not lost one either. I have not been in a lawsuit. Well, I guess aside from like technically when like your car you get into an accident or something like that. But yeah, I
Just
couldn't tell
occurred
you.
to me as all.
I don't know. I do not know.
Because, would the government take a chunk if I won that
Right.
lawsuit and then passed it on to my kids after my death?
Hmm. Well, yeah, probably. If you got the
Yeah.
money and then passed it to them,
Well,
I
here
would say
you would,
that would
yeah, here's would get
absolutely.
this like depending on the amount, like 40% or something like that. Like it's
Oh,
Yeah,
quite
yeah.
a
yeah.
big inheritance tax is quite chunky, doesn't
Huge.
it?
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's a good amount here. That for sure would. But if it went straight to them, I don't know that that would be the same case.
Okay.
I remember. I don't know if you
Um,
remember. Like here, you could tell me if we're going too far ahead, but I do remember there being a bit of a panic of asbestos in the UK. Like I remember in
Mm.
in the 90s there being I can't pinpoint the advert or
right.
the thing, but I can remember it being like, oh, you've got to be careful, that could have asbestos in, or every time you went in a
Yep.
new building or you went in, it was always like, oh, be careful.
Yeah, I think it was very similar here. It was talked about a lot. And
Yeah.
I think maybe a thing I'm about to tell you about might be part of what led to that being a thing Brits were
Well, there
aware
is a
I
of.
I seem to remember like it being an issue in older schools
mm,
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah.
and
Schools and
universities
theaters.
theaters, leisure centers. Exactly. Ah, fuck, we got to
Right.
close that asbestos.
Well, yeah, and it's like the tricky thing is like if you're going to deal with it, like I said, taking it out is dangerous. And so you can't have whatever place it is running while you deal with the asbestos problem. It means you're going to have to shut that place down in order to take care of that problem.
Well,
So
yeah,
Wow.
just to add context to that, so for a short time during COVID, and I was listening to this podcast
Yeah, yeah.
whilst doing this thing that I was doing, I ended up becoming a chemical spill operative for a very short time, just desperately trying to
ooh,
Get
make.
the fuck
Yeah,
out of here.
it might be a story.
wonderful.
It may be another story for another time, but we could dig into it if we need to. But it was at Manston Airport. I don't know if you know Manston Airport, but it's the largest
Hmm.
runway in one of the largest runways in Europe.
Oh
It's an old
wow.
RAF airbase,
Oh, interesting.
and all sorts of stories from there. I've got tons of interesting stuff like that. But the main thing was that there was a fire station that is this not used. It was an abandoned fire station. Whole thing is asbestos.
Yes,
The
right,
whole thing.
exactly. If you're talking,
Wow.
and I'll get into that in a second too, but if you're talking World War II,
Yeah, yeah. Oh,
you
yeah,
are
yeah.
talking
Whole thing.
asbestos,
And
like
you
all
literally
the way down.
it was like a no-go zone around the whole
Yeah,
thing. It's like you are not,
100%.
they can't do anything with it, they can't move it, they can't touch it. It's just sitting there in
Yeah.
amongst this airport, which has been active for passenger flights until recently and
Wow.
possibly will do again in the future. So yeah,
Yeah.
it's
That's the
big
a
deal.
huge boom came around World War
A
II
lot of
with
people
this.
during COVID bought a hot tub. Some people
No,
learned how
It
to
came
solve a Rubik's Cube.
I
it's
became a
not what
chemical
Benner's
spill
was up
operative.
to.
Yeah.
So it wasn't until greater regulations were introduced in America, Britain, and Canada in the late 60s and 70s that its use began to decline in those areas. Uh, an interesting example of that is that the first 40 floors of the Twin Towers were coated in sprayed asbestos for insulation in the early 1970s. But by the time it was finished in 1973, regulations had been passed during its construction. And so everything above the 40th floor is not sprayed with asbestos. So the
Didn't do that
regulations
much
came
good, did it?
in the.
I knew that. I
Aww.
knew it was coming. I
Yeah,
saw
I
his
was
eyes
looking at
light
you
up.
as well.
Oh,
Wasn't that
jeez.
Well,
fucking good?
I mean, to be very dark about it, but unfortunately, it's one of the issues, right, with the Twin Towers. And one of the things that they've been fighting about for the past 24 years is the fact that asbestos affected the first responders. So you
Oh,
remember
right,
all of
right, right,
that
right, right.
dust
Yes,
that was,
yes,
Mhm.
yes.
brought up by the towers collapsing. The first 40 floors were coated in asbestos. And so all the
Shit.
people who were working in that area and being exposed to it are now 15,
Mhm.
20, 25 years later,
Good
dealing
God.
with cancer as a result of that. So your quip is correct in a sense. Like, it didn't do them much good because those 40 floors of asbestos ended up
Yeah.
poisoning a whole bunch of people anyway.
Which is what I meant. It wasn't just
Yeah, yeah, that's yes.
it was
Obviously.
an informed and educated comment.
Right. So in 1982, a British documentary called Alice, A Fight for Life followed a 47-year-old woman who'd worked in an asbestos factory for 7 months at the age of 17. At 47 years old, she'd been diagnosed with mesothelioma, and by the time she found out about it, she only had months left to live, according to her
Fucking
doctor.
hell.
Yeah, it's horrific. And the thing about it is this is about, right, like the minimum amount of time it takes for mesothelia to show up is about 15 years. So you'll be sort of riding along. Maybe you'll have scratchy throat or things like that occasionally, but the cancer will hit 15 years or more later. So people don't realize that they had this until long after they have left that environment, which means that for a long time, people probably died of asbestos related stuff who had no idea that was what killed them.
Isn't it fucking mad, right? Isn't it mad that stuff that you can mine from our own Earth
Right. It's just
will just
like alien planet shit. Like,
absolutely
we're
fuck you
also
up?
concerned about what would happen if you stepped out on some other planet somewhere, but our planet is doing that.
That
It's
is
like full of shit that does this.
absolutely mad to
And
me.
is that the case that it is kind of already as its natural
Yeah, it's
in rock
already like
form,
that naturally.
It's already just it's not like we've added or
Yeah.
mixed or like created this
Wow.
demon dust.
Yeah. No, pure asbestos, which is actually I was
Wow.
watching Hank Green did a video about asbestos, and it's like it's a broad name for I think 4 different minerals or something like that, maybe 7 different minerals, but yeah, it's like a group of minerals that all have these properties to them. So yeah, naturally occurring, the way that they come out of the earth without us mixing it with anything, this is what it does. It's just like this. If you break it open, you're gonna have a bad time. And in this documentary, she described her experiences in the factory, which is again gonna like hark right back to the radium girls. No one told her and her colleagues that they were working with a killer material, so they would straight up just play with the dust and toss it around and stuff like that, having no idea that they were killing themselves with it.
Sounds like you're a radiation dude. You remember the
Yeah,
guys,
exactly.
the
Like they
X-ray
were just
hospital guys.
right. And sitting there painting their lips with it and stuff like that, right? Like no idea. Nobody was like, "Hey, that'll kill you." And this documentary also followed people like Tony Mendel, a general manager of Cape Asbestos, who said he'd gone to about 110 funerals in his decade or so working for the company and kept a black tie in his desk drawer because he just had to go to funerals so often.
Jesus Christ.
And shortly after the doc was made, he found out that he too had contracted the cancer.
What was the company? Cape Asbestos.
Cape Asbestos. Sounds
I really wanna
really
see
like
their logo.
delightful until you
Sounds like a holiday
find out what it
destination.
is, right? Oh, I'm going to Cape Asbestos.
Is it all inclusive?
Right? Sure is. But rather than dealing with what they'd done, when the penny finally dropped and people started suing the corporations responsible for their illnesses, those companies often just declared bankruptcy to avoid having to pay for anything. And of course, once they couldn't sell the asbestos in the Western world, they just took that shit to developing countries, like India, bringing mass death to new areas that are still dealing with it now, China, India, places like that. At the time, the Canadians in particular loved to ship their loads of asbestos to those countries and then wash their hands of further responsibility. What's done with it wherever it lands is the responsibility of whoever received it. To this day, asbestos kills more than 100,000 people a year and is banned in 59 countries, according to Vice. And you probably won't be surprised to find out what country is the leading manufacturer of asbestos now. You guys want to guess?
Switzerland.
No. Benners, any guesses?
It's got to be USA, surely.
It's not us. It's not us.
Shit.
Oh,
No.
China.
oh
Nope.
yes.
It's not China.
Is it us?
It's Russia.
I was going to say. Okay.
Fine. That's
It
all right
is
then.
Russia.
As long as it's not us.
I was starting to get worried. Oops.
Oh no. What have we done?
It's Russia, and they're super proud of it. There's a Vice documentary that I have included in the references, which are always in every episode in the show notes. So, give that a look if you're interested. But there's a Vice documentary I added that is fucking crazy to watch. It is insanity. In this, they go to a town that has renamed itself because of its asbestos production. It is called Asbest. And they have a giant pit from which they mine asbestos and use dynamite to do so, blasting asbestos dust all over the place. And
this is horrible.
It's horrible. And the locals at least appear not to give a shit. It feels very much though like that, like Russian bravado or whatever, and so they don't wear masks, they don't wear gloves, they don't protect themselves from
why is
the
this funny
asbestos.
to me?
Right. It's like, I mean, that's what's crazy about watching it, is that like part of you is like, you have to laugh because this is fucking crazy. These guys are like, nah, we're not afraid. Fear is the thing you die from. But if you don't fear it, then your body repairs itself. And you're like, stop. Come on. Stop this.
Wow.
Like,
Are we sure? Yeah.
I don't think that's science.
I wonder,
Like, this is...
and maybe you'll know, maybe you've come across this, has the use of asbestos been explored as a weapon, in a weaponized form? Aerosol delivery of asbestos dust?
I don't know.
So
it seems like a thing that would be. I mean, the problem is, if you want to wait 15,
warfare, you know what I mean?
to 20 years,
country for years ahead.
It's not quite an anthrax attack, is it? But it's
you'd really have to be playing the long game for that one to work, because minimum 15 years.
It sounds like that's kind of what Canada were doing to places.
Well,
sending it out to everyone, wasn't it?
Right, exactly. Just outsource it elsewhere and don't have to think about it. I don't know. My inclination would be that it's not a fast enough working weapon for that to be worthwhile. But I can't say for sure. But in Russia, in the town of Asbest, like I said, they don't wear protective gear or anything like that. They straight up deny that there's anything wrong with it. Everyone they interview in this documentary is like, no, I can pick it up with my hands. It's fine. Like, as long as I wash them afterwards. And they basically are like, everyone's exaggerating. There is no danger to asbestos. That's not real. One guy that they interview does acknowledge that, there's a lot of sick and dying people here, but, he points out that you'll never find out the numbers because the factories hide it. And anyway, you have to deal with it because that's how you make a living. So what are you going to do?
That's what it comes down to, right? They're all getting money.
Right.
They get...
So banning its production would be economically devastating to the area that mines and manufactures it in Russia. It is literally the only gig. There's no other thing you can do aside from mine this asbestos in this particular area of Russia. Be economically devastating. I think death is more devastating, but I'm not Russian. In the Vice doc and the Evil Dust doc, they show people who never even worked with asbestos. People who had my dad worked in a mine, and then they came home and just the dust that was on their clothes was enough to give those children cancer decades later on. It's that dangerous. And there's no way these Russians are just built different. They simply aren't acknowledging what's happening. They visited an oncologist near Asbest, and he did say there's lots of lung cancer, but he refused to say that there was anything wrong with asbestos. He was like, no, actually, I love the air in asbestos. I think it's actually really nice. And he claimed that they don't get any more patients there than they do from anywhere else. They tried to visit another hospital.
I was just saying they probably haven't got a hospital, but they have got hospitals. Okay.
Yeah, they have hospitals.
Okay.
They've tried visiting another one, and no one would let them in. But they talked to a woman outside who's sort of under anonymity. Was like, no one is going to tell you the truth. You are not going to find a person who's going to do that. Like, this is again the only gig in town. You think someone's going to risk their livelihood to tell you? Like, we're all dying here. Like, that's not going to happen.
My God.
So it's really bizarre to watch, just literally everyone just smiling and acting like everything is great, like as if someone is standing behind them with a gun to their head. Like, no, I love it. I put it on my ice cream. I love asbestos. It's so great. It's bizarre. Just a bunch of Russians pretending this industry isn't killing people. There
Do
is.
we,
Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, do we think do we think, because, I guess we were doing similar for 90 odd years or maybe 80 years of kind of using it and building it. Do we think that's just, they just don't have access to the information, right? Surely. Maybe they're
I
just not
think it's
being
a
told
little,
people are
yeah,
dying because of that. They're not.
right. I think it's a little bit of multiple things. So they also in that documentary go and talk to like a guy in Moscow whose job it is to research asbestos in asbest. And he is under fire from the entire world scientific community because his findings are, of course, oh, there's nothing wrong with asbestos, right?
There
So
you go,
there's a
yeah.
degree of information suppression that is happening here for sure. That said, if you live in that town and you notice everyone's dying at 45, like you're gonna make connections. So you're probably gonna go like, this must be from what we're doing, but like you can't say anything about it either because there is an attitude of like, this is not a thing we say. We don't risk, the entire town going under because someone got sick, right? So I think it's a mix of both those things. You're able to be in denial a little more if also your government is saying this doesn't exist.
Yeah.
You're imagining the problem, right? It's very odd. But there is one town in Australia that bears witness to the fact that people don't just escape the asbestos industry unscathed. Or at least it used to bear witness. Now the town has been scrubbed from maps, it's been condemned, and at least 1,200 of the people who live there have died from asbestos-related disease. The town is called Wittenoom. So as the beginning of World War II loomed, mining entrepreneurs Lang Hancock and Peter Wright began mining and exporting crocodylite, or blue asbestos, from Wittenoom, sending it off to Europe for use in the war effort. So they were sending all that shit to you guys at the time, to Europe and Britain, in order to be used for those fire stations and whatnot. Asbestos being notoriously fire and water resistant made it a very attractive material for, war things. In 1943, a company called Colonial Sugar Refinery Company, or CSR, bought out their mining leases and continued exporting the raw asbestos for the usual reasons: shipbuilding, construction, and construction and manufacturing. And because asbestos was pretty much the only industry in the area, much like that place in Russia, Wittenoom became a company town, peaking at a population of 881 and making it the largest town in the area because Australia. The people who worked in Wittenoom were exposed to levels of blue asbestos 1,000 times higher than what was considered safe in a workplace. And while the government's health bodies were like, hey, this is super dangerous, the company went on doing this with impunity until the mid-1960s. While the mine was in order, the town of Wittenoom, in large part made up of German immigrants by the middle of the 20th century, revolved around it. And asbestos literally coated every aspect of their lives. The people would spread what are called asbestos tailings over the pavement, schoolyards, playgrounds, homes, and businesses because it helped to curb some of the extreme Australian heat and suppress dust that came as a natural byproduct of living in the Australian outback. And tailings are basically just the waste product of blue asbestos. It's just asbestos dust, more or less. It gives the vibe of that scene in the first episode of Chernobyl where everyone is just going about their lives as happy as can be, and like just like a bird falls out of the air and dies. You're like, yikes, this is probably a bad idea, guys. And a weird revelation to me as a kid who grew up listening to my mother's favorite band, Midnight Oil, is that they actually have a song about Wittenoom, which also applies quite well to asbestos, describing how people just have to accept the horrors of the mines to make a living. Have you guys heard the song Blue Sky Mine by Midnight Oil?
No.
Doesn't ring a bell.
I always loved it, but I thought it was just like about mines in general. Let me just read some of the lyrics for you here. So lyrics say, I'm caught at the junction, still waiting for medicine. The sweat of my brow keeps on feeding the engine. Hope the crumbs in my pocket can keep me for another night. And if the Blue Sky Mining Company won't come to my rescue, if the sugar refining company won't save me, who's going to save me? And if I work all day on the Blue Sky Mine, there'll be food on the table tonight. If I walk up and down on the Blue Sky Mine, there'll be pay in your pocket tonight. And some have sailed from a distant shore, and the company takes what the company wants, and nothing's as precious as a hole in the ground. It's telling that whole story down to like the sugar refining company that bought the place and continued to mine the asbestos there, to sort of the way that people had to continue working because that was the only thing that was going to put pay in their pocket at the end of it. And that, some have sailed from a distant shore. There's all these, German immigrants coming and living in this town who are, this is the better life that they can have here, is working for this stupid hole in the ground that is killing everybody there. So, as is often the case in Australia and here in the United States, and in anything Midnight Oil writes a song about, Indigenous people are amongst those that A, could have seen this coming, and B, have been impacted greatly because this was their fucking land. The Banjima people populated the area in and around Vietnam for millennia, and of course, no one asked them their take on letting these companies buy it up and poison the area. Which is always wild to me. Indigenous people will live where something insanely dangerous exists for thousands of years and manage to learn not to fuck with it. And then white people will come in, see the thing, be like, no need to think about it, just use it, and make the place uninhabitable in a matter of decades. Like, Vietnam is pretty much just a microcosm of the whole ass earth at this point. Like, Indigenous people live in here forever, and then white people were like, what if we destroyed it, though? Let's try that. So now the government of Western Australia has shut the area down for good, but with zero immediate plans to clean the place up so that the Indigenous people can have the land back. Further, even though Indigenous folks weren't the ones working the mines, just living near it caused them to have the same health problems that afflicted the ones directly working and covering their playgrounds with asbestos trailings. Indigenous people further warn that the whites are just going to start mining again and stir up the same problems, and they appear to be right. The richest woman in Australia, Gina Reinhardt, is the daughter of a man who mined Vietnam's asbestos, and reportedly she wants to mine iron ore just outside the contamination zone with an eye to expanding within that area. It's also worth noting that while only 2 residents of the town stayed behind until finally leaving in 2022, dumbass tourists have been visiting Vietnam for years, camping out to check it off some kind of really stupid bucket list. As Bodie Norman, president of the Red Dog 4-Wheel Drive Club, put it, quote, one bit of fiber, the Red Dog 4-Wheel Drive Club. It's a guy who, he's just like into like off-roading and shit like that, He said, quote, one bit of fiber can cause in 20 years' time a lot of harm and hurt. Touristing there is really so stupid it's hard to fully express, but the government also says that shutting off all the roads and whatnot would likely have the opposite effect they want. As Norman put it, quote, saying danger, do not enter is like having a bag of lollies in the cupboard and saying kids don't eat these lollies. People are still going to do it. A lot of them, too. According to one of the later residents, Mario Hartman, during the COVID lockdowns, he would see between 50 to 60 cars a day going out to the gorge itself, the place where it was mined from, ground zero of the asbestos, and like going and hanging out. It's fucking idiots.
Wow.
So today, asbestos is actually incredibly avoidable. You do not have to deal with it in your day-to-day life. If you see it, don't touch it. Get a professional to deal with it and whatnot. But this is the thing that has been the boogeyman for the past however many years in our culture, and still kills tons of Americans and Brits and so forth every year just from the effects that take a while to set in. Bananas.
Yeah, wasn't at all ready for that. That was quite funny up to a point.
Right. Yeah.
It's quite funny up to the point that people are just holidaying to.
Right.
Maybe they thought it was Aspen, but they went to Aspen.
Right. Yeah.
Maybe
Exactly. It's just this is all a big misunderstanding. It was like a Dumb and Dumber situation.
Yeah.
I wanted to think this. I think there's a more of a focused piece, I think, for us on that town in Russia, Asbestos Land, or whatever the fuck it's called. Maybe they are built different. Who knows? I mean, danger tourism, I think would be quite good there.
Yeah, danger tourism is an interesting idea. I think talking about asbestos is difficult because clearly they have a very controlled narrative. So nothing I can look up on the internet is going to get any deeper than that Vice documentary that actually went there and tried to talk to people who all gaslighted this woman to her face.
I do wonder how much of it is still around, because there was my house is Victorian house, old, very old, and
Yep.
I'm almost certain there's going to be something around somewhere in this place. Like,
Sure. I mean,
because
being Victorian, you have the thing where it's like it wouldn't have been built with it in it.
no, but it would have been added
But
to
yeah,
at
someone might
some
have tried
point.
to update shit later on
It
and
was like
put it
us
in
with
there.
you guys talked about lead a while ago, and
Right,
we
yeah.
actually we've got like a coal hole, a cave at the front of our house that goes under the road, and yeah,
Ooh.
so I have a cave. I often tell the kids I'll lock them in there if they're being naughty. And
Have you ever done it?
up close. I think they just call my bluff. I think they just go, all right, we'll go in there for a bit.
Yeah,
Be fun.
sure. Mm.
But we actually found that our water pipe, bit like what you had, is that our water pipe coming in. When I looked at it, I was like, it's got kind of a leady look. So
Yeah.
our
no.
mains water pipe was
Wow.
lead. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So it was kind of a similar thing of which I guess that would have been wrapped at some point, probably in asbestos covering and stuff like
knows
that.
what.
So just like
It's wild that things can
so
go
these
on
things
that
are
long
still
though,
around,
that, like,
right? These
yeah,
things are still
right.
around.
Like you would think whoever lived in that house before you would have been like, hey, we should get rid of this lead pipe, but for some reason that stuff persists. It's really
Well,
so I don't know, check your shit.
Yeah,
There's
yeah.
still a legacy of
Mm.
mesothelioma in the UK. Just
There
while
is.
Corey's been talking, I've just been kind of having a little look. Benaz, what if I were to ask you to guess for me, where in the UK would you say is top in the
Ooh.
kind of league of UK hotspots of mesothelioma
I'm
related
gonna go
directly to?
That
north
was what
way,
I was
kind of
gonna say.
mining villages,
Yeah.
mining towns.
Your logic is sound, but it's the other end of the country. Plymouth is number one.
Wow.
Plymouth.
Oh shit.
Yep.
Okay,
Oh,
shipbuilding.
shipbuilding.
Yeah,
Shipbuilding.
Yeah.
Exactly. So
Yes.
Plymouth,
Yeah.
Southampton, but then you
Mm-hmm.
go further up north, Gosport, that kind of way. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, still some 650 odd deaths in the Plymouth area.
Wow.
In a report from a workplace injury firm from 2024. So there's still fucking the legacy.
Yeah. Yeah. Wild. Okay, I changed my mind. Everybody check your house. Make sure you don't have asbestos.
Yeah,
And then
if you could.
But
someone
don't
to
take
deal
a
with it.
hammer to
But
it.
don't
or
take a
like-
hammer to it.
No.
Listen to what I say. Do not do
And
that.
as delicious as it might look, don't even think about it.
It's a little cotton candy-ish, I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah.
It's not makeup.
No. Thanks, Corey. A lot of fun.
Wonderful job.
A lot of fun.
All right, Mark Lewis, you wanna take us in?
Yeah.
Maybe you can lead me to our scotching.
Yes, of course. Welcome, friends. Welcome back. Good choice. Great move. Welcome back to Jack of all Graves. What we have here is the podcast that a lot of people are calling. It's the Joe Rogan Experience, but for the left. A lot of people are saying that.
They are. All of our reviews. That's what they say.
A lot of people are saying that this week in particular. It's the Joe Rogan Experience for the left. It's the Joe Rogan Experience for the left that the left has been yearning for and crying out for. Is Joag the Joe Rogan Experience for the left? That came from Variety this week.
Yeah. Right.
Is Corrigan the Joe Rogan of the left?
Ooh. Okay.
That was from Podcast Weekly.
Sensing a dig here.
No, and I think we actually are. So there's that. We hope you're all well and asbestos free. Take a look at your fingers if there's any doubt. If you have your
if they're looking
like
a little bulbous.
ET fingers.
If you're starting to feel like a Windsor.
If you're crackling a little bit, then maybe check your pipes out. Not like that. Friends, we are delighted and blessed, thrice blessed, in fact, to have a guest with us this week. We have the eminent, fucking long-time friend of the cast and friend of Corrigan and mine, Mr. John Benfield, who joins us. Ben, say hello, mate. It's an absolute treat to have you on. It really is. After all this time.
It's great to be part of it finally, and obviously I have been listening since 2020. I think it was COVID.
Amazing.
Wow.
and actually it was our friends over, or your pod friends at Dead and Lovely that turned me onto you guys, and RIP, because they're although Hell Rankers is doing
pour one out.
Hell Rankers is doing great things. So, but yeah, love those guys, and then came on, got pulled onto this, and I got just to blow a bit of smoke up on you guys,
Oh,
or
feel free.
vape mist, whatever you want to do.
Fruit flavored vape mist.
Yeah,
I'll have a huff.
It was during COVID, kind of a weird time, and jobs being lost and lives being messed up, and I was obviously a big listener of Dead and Lovely, and then got kind of pulled onto you guys, and that was it. And it was a real good time, a good little distraction, despite some of the things that you guys talked about, but it was really helpful. It was good for me at the time. So just a big thank you to you guys for keeping it going and being part of it, because it was a big part of my life all through 2020. And there were some dark times, and it was good to have stuff like this. To keep you going.
Very heartening to hear. Thanks, dude. And I gotta tell you, earlier on today when the in-laws were around, I kind of thought to myself, I miss it.
I miss COVID.
I do miss it in certain ways. It was a strange fucking time, and nobody was the same coming out of it. But it wasn't all bad, was it, eh?
Well, I mean, there was a little, my wife and I often say so at the time. It was just my wife and my daughter, and I. And we got to say, when will I ever get 4 or 5 months with my kids?
Right.
Uninterrupted, despite all the crap that was going on around it. And actually, if you just kind of went into your bubble, and actually, as a male in work, you're never gonna get that time.
Right.
So I got a week half pay leave in my job that I was in at the time.
Yeah.
So I often think, I can never. That's the silver lining in that one, right?
Exactly. That's the kind of things we needed to get us through, all of that kind of stuff. Was like, oh, okay, well, at least I get to spend time with my family.
Although then I did end up cleaning chemicals at an old disbanded airport, so I guess something went wrong along the way, right?
Yeah. Can't be all just baby cuddles, can it?
Yeah, exactly.
Man. The fucking shit that we are cursed to live through in this fucking era, man. Fucking horrific, isn't it horrific? But in the best kind of way. And that's the fucking vibe, isn't it? Horrific, but in the best kind of way.
Absolutely.
So yes, we hope this episode finds you well, in spite of all of this, in spite of everything that's going on. They once again, just as far as weeks go on the fucking burning rock that is planet Earth, it's been another insane one. Nothing that we want to go into, but what we're talking about, and we'll I dare say we'll reach back and talk about this in coming weeks. But another poison chalice, another fucking dubious privilege, as if it wasn't fucking fun and awful enough to watch the climate changing and looming over us all like the sword of Damocles. It's also become ever more fascinating and grim and repugnant to watch the not even masked rise of fascism in global superpowers now.
No
Isn't
kidding.
that mad?
Yeah, it's all out there.
Who could have fucking seen that coming as well?
Yeah. Who could have?
Well, we might go into some of that.
Exactly.
Yes, because actually, the kind of writing's been on the wall for a while. But it's probably the speed at which it's the uptick of it has suddenly gone up several notches, right? It's just and it's all of a sudden just embedded itself. So it would have been a left field one if I'd have come on here and actually been a massive right winger that just been just hiding myself for the whole way through like that.
Oh no, abort
quite quickly.
We will get to John here. We'll talk about what John does and why we've got him here and so forth, but we'll sort of get into, as promised, the what's the report called now? My brain is
it is the World Economic Forum Global Risk Report.
Global Risk Report, which we will get into that stuff beforehand.
Yeah, I mean, look, the point being, you hear me and Corey, catastrophizing the world around us and listing many of the ways in which we suspect that we're fucked. But this week, friends, what we're planning on doing is looking for a little bit of economic and data-driven rigor around our
why we're actually
prophecies. Yes. So let's see if we can't actually tie it down and prove the fact that we're fucked. All of which in a bit, but as we do, we're going to meander a little bit first. We're going to talk about what we've watched, and just the fucking, what are we doing to distract ourselves? You know, what are we
Also,
doing? Mm.
yeah. I have an update, Mark Lewis.
Ah, ah.
I'm
How does it
surprised you didn't
feel?
immediately want to
How
bring
does it
this up
feel?
to
How does
me.
it feel? How does it feel? Blue Sky is the one, right? Blue Sky is
Blue Sky,
absolutely
yes.
the closest that we have to a safe haven, I think, socially, from a social media
Mhm.
point of view. And just before we talk about this, and maybe this is one for next week, but uh, earlier on this week, I posted a little story about Elon Musk's heartfelt kind of hand gesture that he did at the inauguration. A lot of people are saying it was a Nazi salute.
No, it's weird. I don't know. I don't
Uh,
see it. I don't see
a
that.
lot of people are saying that.
Very vague.
But and again, mate, it's not one for this week. But I had a very interesting exchange with somebody who I barely know, just a nodding acquaintance who goes to my gym, and talk about a fucking real life eye opener, a real
Right.
life fucking example of uh Musk pilling in action.
Right.
Just a British guy, right? As far as I'm aware, just a Brit like you or I, Benners. And the hoops this fella went through in this quite, day long exchange of instant messages with me on Instagram, just tying himself up in all manner of knots to excuse or to hand wave away what was going on right before his fucking eyes. It
I
was
love that, like, what's
fascinating.
really great about someone spending an entire day trying to, like, justify you how, like, oh, Elon's not a Nazi and he didn't mean that thing or whatever. It's like only then
Mm,
followed up like 2 days later by Elon going to like a far right German
yeah,
conference and being like, hey guys,
yeah,
like, it's okay that you were Nazis, don't worry about it. Like,
yeah.
It's good on both sides.
yeah, right.
Good people,
Like,
good people,
Good
yeah,
people on
both
both
okay. Do you want
sides,
sides.
to
both
do you want to
sides.
jump back in the inbox or what do
Yeah,
you think?
mad shit, mad shit, mad shit.
Bad
But to
shit.
business.
Mm.
When did we talk about this? It was cast your minds back
Just
if you can.
2 weeks ago.
2 weeks, two
Mm-hmm.
weeks ago, where we discussed, or Corey came on and talked about the fascinating and culturally significant case of one DB Cooper, the geezer who took a plane hostage and just noped the fuck out the door,
Yeah.
never to be heard from again.
Yeah. That's the
Now,
guy.
Corey, you wrap that one up with the tantalizing notion that the case might have been solved, that the
Yes, if
breadcrumbs,
you if you
the
listened
dots
to
had
that
been joined.
episode,
Mm,
I mentioned that it had just been in the past, few weeks since before that I had written that story or whatever. There had been all the news had been talking about the fact that it might have finally been solved, that they found this parachute that had belonged, it seemed, to DB Cooper, that it matched the descriptions to a degree that there was just no possible way that this could have belonged to someone else. And this seemed pretty much like a smoking gun. It seemed like that, was open and shut. That's it. We've got the evidence. How would this guy have had this parachute if he were not
mm.
DB Cooper? However, a total DB Cooper nerd who I'm sort of in love with
Yeah, amazing.
jumped into our replies on Blue Sky.
Is she someone that you knew beforehand?
No, no, not at all. And
Oh,
she
And
that's
just
has no
fantastic.
daily searching DB Cooper, DB Cooper,
exactly
DB Cooper.
no
Brilliant.
posts.
Oh, I
She
love
has
them.
no posts on her main feed, none at all, none of her own posts. Her
Oh, that's so
only
good.
posts are replies to other people about DB Cooper. I
Oh,
fucking love this
fucking love
dedication.
her so
That's
much.
incredible.
Absolutely love this, that she is just in there like, I am here to tell people the facts of this case.
Just
Ah,
the last line of defense
I
between
love
Yeah.
it.
DB
I
Cooper
love it so
misinformation and the
much.
world.
Yeah, just exactly. Just like, I'm not gonna let this
Is
stand.
she DB Cooper?
Yeah, or some kind. Hey,
Oh, Erica exclamation point. Are you
Are
DB
you DB
Cooper?
Cooper?
So
She's going to be hitting up
she
my timeline.
she jumps into the DMs. And like, of course, when it comes to researching things, you can see my research in the like I said, in the descriptions of every
it's
single episode.
exhaustive.
Yeah, and I cross-reference a whole bunch of things. Like, there's stuff I look at that I don't even include in my references because I'm just cross-referencing. I'm not necessarily using anything from them. I'm just making sure all of the sources say the same thing, which is what was the case with this. And I love that she addressed this. So She said, hate to rain on the parade, but sadly this isn't right. Dan Grider, the source for all this, is a notorious grifter and, love this, COVID conspiracy theorist.
Oh,
Just,
sprinkle that in.
yeah,
Aw.
just why
Do you
not?
know,
Of course.
she
Yeah.
was even super cool about it.
Oh, totally. There's no sense of like,
No
well,
anger.
actually, it's like
Nah.
super informative, just like letting us know. I love, I'm going to keep reading because everything she said is fantastic. Love this.
Yeah.
So notorious grifter and COVID conspiracy theorist. As grifters do, he lies and bets on no one fact-checking, which the media predictably didn't. Like the description, a sport parachute with D-rings, he made that up. Cossie, so Cossie was the guy who sold the parachutes, right? And so he was supposed to have, according to Grider, made this parachute that was like adapted in all of these sorts of ways to go from being a military parachute to a civilian parachute. So what she's saying is that Cossie, that guy, never said that the sport parachute had the D-rings on it. The FBI files are declassified and available to the public, so we know exactly what he said. He said the parachute was a Navy surplus with no D-rings and no Capewell quick release. So those are the things Grider basically said this had, was he had turned it into one that had a quick release and the D-rings. Grider, as he usually does, lied because the parachute he found doesn't match Cooper's. What Grider doesn't mention is that the reason McCoy's hijacking was similar was because he wrote a term paper on DB Cooper, and he constantly bragged about how he could do the Cooper hijacking better, that he is ruled out as being DB Cooper by all eyewitnesses, and that he was in Utah on November 24th. He said Special Agent Larry Carr, who is the DB Cooper case agent from 2007 to 2010, went on a podcast to talk about this earlier this month. And he said it makes you wonder what the folks at CNN are even being paid to do. Like, seriously, come on. This is coming out on podcasts and shit instead of in the news. And then I love this detail too. To me, the funniest thing by far is that Lad Bible, of all places, were the first to publish a debunking. Lad Bible! Imagine being a journalist
Up
at
the
CNN
lads.
or The Guardian and seeing Lad Bible conduct more thorough fact-checking than you. Jesus Christ.
No.
So
no.
I asked her, do you have a favorite theory, or do you think that there's just not enough evidence for us to know? To which she replied, they recovered some hair from the hijacker's headrest. It was passed around like a... She's seriously so cool. I love her. It was passed around like a proverbial joint at a party before disappearing from documentation. Unlike the cigarette butts, which we know were destroyed, that hair slide should still be out there somewhere. If we find it, we'll have DNA. That's the only real hope. For a time, we were hoping that maybe some family was just waiting for Grandpa to kick the bucket before going public, but it's a bit late for that. Cooper has definitely been dead for a while now. Few chain smokers live to the age of 100, after all. But there are some compelling suspects. My favorite is Ted Braden. He was a decorated Black Ops commando in Vietnam, mercenary in the Congo, CIA asset, and stole hundreds of thousands of dollars in heists across the U.S. in the 70s and 80s. Special Forces guys from Vietnam are all certain it was him. And she included like the sketch that we've all seen of DB Cooper with some pictures of him where he does have those like wide set droopy eyes and the pursed mouth and all that kind of stuff. So I can see like how it looks more like this drawing than what the other guy did as well. So, hey, listen, debunked me, got me, scotched it.
Yeah, but this is just such a beautiful example of scotching done right. And even how you reacted
this is what I was going to
well.
say. Like, wow.
Isn't it lovely? So civil and so,
Right.
polite.
Yeah, tell me more, like
it's almost like
umbrage.
when facts are involved, people are pretty cool.
Well, some are not. But,
what a great point.
And usually it's just because people are spouting what stuff they don't actually know about, isn't it? Really?
Right.
This girl actually, she has no reason to get angry. She could just say this. Right. Here you go.
Yeah,
amazing.
100%.
I mean, I do love her.
Just like, here's my special interest.
Instant follow. Like.
Yeah, right?
Yeah.
Absolutely. So, Erica, thank you so much for that information, and happily take that debunking. And I'm going to look up Ted Braden now, and who knows, maybe I'll talk about him at a later date, or other people can look him up for yourself. But I will put a link about that as well in our description.
Amazing.
And
There are
just huge
books
shout
written
out.
about him. He's got books written about him, this
Oh,
guy.
I'm sure. Yeah.
Um,
So cool. Love it.
How does it feel to be Scotched rather than to be the Scotcher?
Hey, you know what? It's I know I'm an imperfect being,
That's
and I
beautiful.
will, I will accept that. Especially when
Really
I get to
nicely
learn new
put.
things.
Yes, the Joag journey. We're all there, aren't
Yeah.
we?
Listen,
We're all there
it's a
side
thing
by
I've
side.
especially taken from you over the years, Mark. Early on in this
Oh, yeah.
podcast, one of the early things you would say is, that you love being wrong.
Oh, yep.
I
Look,
think that's a good
for
lesson to learn.
something that happens as often as it does, you gotta just fucking get on board with it. You know what I mean?
Right.
Just own it.
Yeah,
I'm not gonna. What I'm gonna do?
exactly.
Stop being wrong? No.
Yeah,
Just grow
two choices
comfortable with
here.
it.
It's like the guys in asbestos. Just what are we gonna do?
Right.
Just keep going, right?
Just keep
Yeah.
going,
What's-
right?
Love asbestos. Yeah. It's great chemical. My lungs are fine. But even right before the advent of GPS, and this is again, I maintain this to my dying day. Before setting out somewhere, I would know full well that I was going to fuck it up and get lost. So rather than go and get stressed about it, I'll just build in an extra 20 minutes
Sure.
and just lean in and just enjoy it and look around and go, oh, this is fun. And then eventually get where I'm going. It's fine.
This is thankfully a thing we also have I mean, I don't get lost like you do. I've seen your weird sense of direction, but
Oh, yeah.
the fact that we both are very low stress about the fact about when it happens
You
makes
can only
for
ever be
good
so
travel
lost, right?
buddies.
You can't-
Yeah, right.
Exactly.
Exactly. Unless you
Beautifully
let the
put.
GPS take you into like a lake or something, like you'll figure it out
Well, especially if
eventually.
it was that lake you mentioned earlier.
Yeah, right. Oh,
Yeah.
some of the exploding lakes and things like that we've
Yeah.
discussed on here. Good luck. Mark, you also apparently your son had some input for this week's episode that you were going to
Oh,
share.
just a question, right? Just a
Mm.
movie-related question.
Okay.
And I can't even remember what movie this gave rise to this query. But Owen asks, and I came up short. I couldn't answer this, hence
Okay.
his appeal to me to bring this to you, to Corey, to Benners, and to our listeners. Owen wants to know, can you think of an example of a movie, right,
Hmm.
where two things are true? Firstly, the bad guys win at the end.
Okay.
And secondly, there's no sequel or any continuation that sets that right.
Ooh, that is a really good question. Because I know I've read books like that, and I really like a shitty ending like that,
Yeah.
where
Oh,
it's
same,
just
same.
nothing to take from that. But wow, what a bummer. And I feel like I watched something recently that had sort of an end like that, and it's not coming to my mind. You, Benners?
I don't know. My brain went to kind of like No Country for Old Men in a way. Like
Oh,
kind
sure.
of what was
Yeah.
it? The Anton kind of
Yeah, Anton Chigurh.
survives, escapes
Mhm.
escapes justice, and then just kind of concludes. The film just kind of ends like that, right? Would that count?
Right.
Would that
Yeah,
be?
it does. It does.
It's
Yeah, absolutely. That's
It's
a
it's
good
the
one.
closest I can get. But yeah, listeners, if
what about
anything comes to
Seven?
your mind-
I mean,
Oh, sure. Yeah.
That's it, isn't it?
Seven's
Yeah.
it, right? Seven's
Big
the
one.
It's just headed up.
That's
well,
it. It
yeah.
all unfolds exactly
Yeah.
how he planned.
Yes.
Oh, nice.
That's
Really
it.
good.
Yeah, that's where I would go to, definitely. Yeah.
I mean, to also keep Kevin Spaceying it doesn't Usual Suspects end that way as well. Kaiser Soze
does.
just gets away. He just hobbles
Walks off.
Yep.
Yeah.
And we certainly don't have a sequel to that. So there are
I guess
some.
I guess the Mist. We wouldn't kind of say that the Mist is a bad
Sure.
guy, but like we know that kind of ends a bit.
If the villain is murdering your kids
if
in a car,
the villain is suicide, yeah,
is
assisted suicide.
If the villain is the
Hastiness, being
inevitability
hasty.
of death, I don't know.
Hastiness.
The villain is hastiness. Yes, it's got kind of a Hamilton
He
thing
seemed
going on with
very eager to cap all those people, didn't he? I don't know. He just hung on a little bit.
So there's a few,
good.
but yeah, tell us more. People
Yeah.
listening, let us know of other movies that end where the villain wins and they don't retcon that in another.
Yeah. and
in
there's
another
and
one.
they keep it that way. They just leave it
Yeah.
that way. I'd love your thoughts, listeners. I really would, because as
I
would
feel like
Owen.
there's an argument to be made that that's how the Fast and the Furious franchise works, because technically, like, they are kind of villains coming from the first one. They're like a bunch of thieves and shit. But
Talking to
you've
the
never
wrong
seen
guy.
them. You've never
Never
seen
Never
seen
them.
meet
this.
Mark. I'm with you on
Oh,
that, and I will
okay.
remain
There
that
we
way.
go.
Well,
And while I'm
they're
not,
kind of, yeah, they are
you know,
technically sort of the
I've
bad guys. They're a bunch of thieves.
but they're a family though, aren't they? That
But
much
They're
they're
our
I know.
family.
family.
We all know they're about the family.
And so
Family is important, right?
you're rooting for them in spite
Ah.
of the fact that technically they're bad guys.
I always think of
Uh,
that. I remember one of my earliest. I remember a memory from watching. I think it was like Outer Limits. Do you remember the show Outer
Of
oh,
Limits?
course,
nice.
yeah.
Yeah, sure.
Classic from Boba. And there's one episode that was like episodic, and one episode of that was when there was and it was I always and I laughed at the end. I thought it was brilliant. And it was that they'd made contact with aliens, and then they translated this like language from the aliens and translated it to like something really on the nose of "we're going to murder you all," and then they just decide to fire a nuke at them. And then what they realized is then the aliens were speaking within water, which like muffled or changed or reversed the sound. So then they kind
Awkward.
of they ran it back through again. It actually said like "we come in peace."
It's like a reverse to
because-
serve man.
Yeah, because they nuked them, the aliens just went, "Okay, we'll just wipe you out." So they just it ends with the whole
Oh,
planet
that's
getting destroyed.
good.
I'm sure it was Outer Limits. It was a brilliant
Yeah.
episode, and it was
Very plausible. Very
and I remember
plausible.
just laughing at it and thinking that's brilliant. That's wonderful. So yeah.
That is great. If we're ready for what we watched, that actually
Mm.
transitions well into a movie that I just watched. That actually
Go
kind
for
of
it.
answers Owen's thing as well. I watched a movie earlier this week called Failsafe. Have either of you seen Failsafe? Apparently they remade it in like the 80s
No.
or something. This is 1964 that Failsafe came out. I'm just going to read you the letterbox description of this. Because of a technical defect, an American bomber team mistakenly orders the destruction of Moscow. The president of the United States has but little time to prevent an atomic catastrophe from occurring. This apparently, so I guess this came out like right after Doctor Strangelove, but it was like this whole thing where there was like a studio dust up, and it was like this was supposed to come out first, but like for whatever reason a whole bunch of things got moved around, and Doctor Strangelove got to come out first. So it's a very similar kind of story. And a good chunk of this movie takes place between the president, played by Henry Fonda, just like on the phone with the Russians, while his translator, played by Larry Hagman, helps to try to like explain to the Russians and reply back to him like, what the fuck is going on? This is an accident. We're not actually trying to blow you up. And the Russians don't believe the Americans and think this is some sort of trick. And meanwhile, the president is trying to talk to the plane that is carrying the bombs and say, hey, don't bomb Moscow. I'm the president. I'm telling you, don't bomb this. But the plane, the pilots have instructions to not take any verbal instructions. So they are going to go bomb Moscow anyway. It is so stressful and so tense, and ends badly for everyone involved in a sort of mutually assured destruction sort of situation here. It's Sidney Lumet, so you're gonna love it. Like, realistically,
yeah, that's an easy win for me.
Yeah,
I mean, did it go into the socioeconomic impact of asbestos prices globally if you get rid of Moscow? The price.
Weirdly, they don't touch on that, and I don't know why. It's
weirdly, I guess it would cure.
Yeah, well,
just wipe it out.
Well, in a roundabout way.
Yeah.
Listen, there's one problem, but you get rid of another.
Yeah. So this was the 60s version. This was the original.
1964.
Okay.
Sidney Lumet, Failsafe. I haven't watched the other one, so I don't know whether it's good or not. But I think Mark is going to be on board for this. I don't know your
it's on my
taste
list.
personally, but it is. It's not a good time, but
I wonder remember we talked about that story about the guy, the fucking geezer in the military base on the night shift, and the nuke alert malfunctioned.
That was a long time ago. Yeah, I think that was a couple of years ago.
I wonder if
that one,
because as in when chronologically.
Oh, when chronologally?
When did that?
Yeah,
happen?
I actually think that was after.
Was it a sub? Was that a submarine?
No.
I don't
where
think
the
I
guy
don't think
was
it was
like,
a
no,
sub.
this isn't
Yeah,
reading
he was like,
right.
"This is
Yeah.
not. We're
Yeah.
not
Tap, tap,
actually
tap, tap.
supposed to fire the nuke." But I want to say that was the 80s, the
Yeah, I
70s
don't know
and
if that was
80s.
much
Yeah,
Yeah.
that
later.
sounds about
So I
right.
think it was
Yes.
later than this.
Okay.
Interestingly, much like Doctor Strangelove, this also has like the like disclaimer that like the US government says for us to tell you that this is not
Yeah.
based on any real thing that has happened and like you're perfectly safe and yada yada. Which is an interesting little Cold War leftover that they had to put in there. But I recommend Failsafe. It was interesting if you're okay with being stressed out and like you are largely
Love
it's
it.
Sidney Lumet. It's a talkie. You know, you're watching people
Mm,
talk
yes.
mostly. Um, it was a good time. Do you
No,
want me to keep going,
enjoyable.
or do you
No,
wanna
no,
jump in?
please. I don't know whether it's the place I'm at in my life or what, but I'm having real fucking trouble getting the movies in these days.
Oh
I've
yeah,
got
yeah, yeah.
I've got a few locked and loaded, but those heady days of like 4 weeks ago where we could just nail like 4 or 5 a week,
Right.
fucking hell.
Yeah,
I
Dude,
always
we
admire
didn't.
you guys. I don't know how I get
I'm
two or
finding
three
it
in a
tough.
week maybe, but it's hard. Yeah, like
Yeah,
I
it's
am
not.
finding it
It's
tough.
because I don't have another social life. It's so
Mm.
at the end of the night, I'm not going anywhere once it hits 8 p.m. It's just the pictures in it.
Well, I tell you what, I'll talk about a real pain then, super
pictures.
briefly.
Oh
Oh, I
Uh,
yes,
watched that one a
I was
couple
looking
weeks
forward to
ago, but
hearing
I
about that.
didn't
It's
talk about it.
yeah, I mean, there's a star separating us in this, Corrigan. I mean, I don't think
Mm.
Makes
you
a change.
clearly like. Yeah, I know. Um, but yeah, I went for it. I really went for it. I mean, this is the kind of movie that I wish existed more. I wish there was more
Mm.
of.
Mhm.
Um, just filming just relationships, people interacting, and kind of playing out the decades of idiosyncrasy and family weirdness passed down through
Mhm.
generations, and watching that play out on screen through some really, really great writing, some really, really great performances, and just no frills at all to this movie. It is, you know what I mean? Everything is
Yeah.
in camera. The soundtrack is sparse, and everything in this movie is the writing and the two performances, Kieran Culkin and Jesse Eisenberg, fantastic. They play two cousins who love one another dearly, but the the
Got a
the
lot of trauma.
generational trauma from the Holocaust uh, clearly weighs heavy on them and their relatives, and we see them kind of meeting up for the first time in like a decade, and just things bubble to the surface. It's just lovely stuff. That I could quite happily have. It's very rare. Like again, a 90-minute film, in and out.
Oh, I
Let's get
love
it
it.
all. Let's say what you
Lovely.
need to say. Get it done. It's very rare. I say that I could have done another half an hour of watching those two work together.
Yeah,
I'm
honestly, I think
developing.
it probably could have done with more because I think my thing with it is it just felt undercooked to me. As I like the idea, um, I just felt like the Holocaust thing, like you could have replaced that with any tragedy. It wouldn't have changed anything
Yeah,
about the
sure.
movie at all. It had
Yeah,
nothing really to do with
yeah.
that, and so the parts that were about the Holocaust felt kind of shoehorned in a way. Whereas like, I would have loved to have developed this a little bit further. I think there's like their relationship is really cool, and I like the way that it feels very real and all that kind of stuff. But none of the side characters, I felt like you could get rid of all of them. They felt like a distraction from the movie because they were kind of comic reliefy and not necessarily
Uh,
adding a whole lot, or they pulled away from the like story here by like I think they were trying to add a diversity element to it. So they have a guy who's not a Jew leading the tour, an Asian fella. They have an African genocide
well,
survivor, but that doesn't really come into the movie at all. Like he kind of describes it at the beginning, but it's more as like comic relief to bounce off of Kieran Culkin than to really relate. And I just felt like everything needed another 20 minutes to a half hour to like simmer instead of really bulldozing over everything, that I think would have helped to make it more meaningful. So it just felt like to
I
me that I was like, it's almost a good movie. It just doesn't follow through on everything.
I hear you, and yet I wonder if a lot of that is kind of what the movie is saying. Your family is gonna fuck you up some way or another, no matter what they frame it around. And as far as the guy who was there dealing with the Rwandan genocide, I don't know, that to me suggested that everybody is coming at something with their own baggage. Everyone is dealing with some trauma from
Which
some
is
part of their
true.
life.
Yeah. I just think to come at it so surface made it so that it felt like kind of flippant. Like, this isn't really a story about Holocaust trauma or anything like that. It's kind of like, well, we all have our bullshit, don't we? You know, like I wanted more
Hmm.
to add to sort of the gravity of like what we are all dealing with here. But I do think, you know, Kieran Culkin's character really comes across very real, and Jesse Eisenberg's frustration with him comes across
Yes.
very real. I
I
also
can imagine
deeply
those two
hated
replay off well against each other. I
yeah.
can
And they
imagine they're
do,
great.
yeah,
Yeah.
and they
I
do.
deeply hated the music though, that I found that super distracting. I hate twee movies. It felt very like Woody Allen, very like just like
You
this
know,
like
that
little
was
mellow
literally my next
jazz.
sentence.
Yeah. I was
Yes,
like, ugh, stop. Just
It did
just
give
no
me just
music
I
if you're
got
gonna do
Woody
it.
Allen vibes from
Yeah.
the
big
things,
time,
the
big
trailers
time.
I saw of it and stuff
Yeah.
like that.
Like
Yeah.
I can't do that I thought was distracting from it as well. I don't know what I would have replaced it with, but the like cutesy little Woody Allen music was not a plus for me.
I hope Jesse Eisenberg isn't listening to this because I know he does.
Yeah,
I hope
he's a
He's a long
regular
time listener.
listener.
Yeah.
I hope he gives this episode a pass, but I don't think it is or should be read as a Holocaust movie. And I say that
No, yeah.
I'm sat down right now, and Schindler's List is on BBC Two, right?
Well,
That's a
No way.
there's a
Is it really?
Holocaust movie right there.
There's a fucking
Yeah.
Holocaust movie.
Yeah.
I don't think A Real Pain is and should be considered a Holocaust movie. It's a movie about how you deal with it, not what it
Mhm.
is.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And that's
I
a
think
tricky thing to pull
it was
off right now.
marketed, I think, very much as like this is a tale of these two
Yeah.
family members, cousins kind of
Yeah.
reconnecting, right? And I remember even in the trailers that I saw, I remember there was like a sprinkle of, oh, we're going to here to
Yes.
revisit our family history kind of thing. But yeah, I think
Yes.
the marketing of it was very much about this tale of these two people that were very different.
Yeah.
And,
Which I think really
yeah.
works. I think they work really well. I think the framing is iffy. If you're going to use something as heavy as the Holocaust at a time at which like a good chunk of people don't think the
Yeah, but
Holocaust
it gets-
happened.
It gets you an Oscar nomination. Then, doesn't it?
Yeah, right, exactly.
Chuck
Like
a
it
bit
is
of
a
Holocaust in
good
there,
little
and you're gonna get
shortcut,
it.
but
Yeah.
you know, feels like it should maybe have a
Yeah.
little bit more to it than that. But
Mm,
yeah, I
mm,
just wanted I wanted a little bit more from it. It's not that I thought it was a
Fair
bad
enough.
movie. It was just that I was
Mm.
like, I just need a little bit more. Just give me a little bit
Just
more
talk,
from it.
mentioning Oscar nominations there.
You know,
If I could just go on,
Yeah.
I maybe could just drop a
Let's
bit of.
go.
Obviously, if I mentioned, if I was going to ask as a quiz question of the films Nosferatu, The Substance, and Alien Romulus, of what connects those three films.
Ooh.
Is it Oscar nominations?
I mean, I've kind
They
of
are.
dropped the
Yeah,
ball by bringing it at
that
the
they are
beginning.
Oh,
all-
right, okay.
But the
crazy.
extended bit is that it's the first time that three horror films have been nominated in the Oscars since 1987.
That's crazy.
1987. So it is our
So,
time,
right.
people.
I'm gonna try.
We are
and-
back.
So in 1987, you're telling me that 3 horror movies were
Oh,
nominated.
Oh, I should have
for
done this
Oscars.
follow-up. Corrigan would have done this, wouldn't you?
Oh god.
Yeah, I'll do it. It's 2 seconds. Go on, you start, and I'm going to get them up.
1987.
Right, so 1987, so they were 1986 movies.
Oh, I guess that depends because they call the Oscars by the year of the. So these will be the 2024
Okay,
God,
okay.
Oscars.
I think
Are they
we.
obscure?
No. Well, hang on.
I
I think we would have got. I think you would have got a couple of them, but okay.
So these are movies that came out in 87.
Yeah.
Okay. I don't know. That's a tough one. 87.
1987 horrors. Is Aliens in there for practical effects, for visual effects?
Aliens
Okay,
is in there.
Aliens. Nice.
All right.
What else came out in 87?
I'm now trying to find just the list, but I'm having to go through like the whole thing. Okay.
Right, one of them's Aliens.
Not Alien. What else came out in?
Well, 87 is the greatest year for cinema in the history of cinema, right? Everything fucking
I
great
think
came
you
out in
have made this
1987.
argument
And it's
before.
true. And
Oh,
I'll
84 is pretty strong, but yeah,
80,
it's
yes.
84 is strong.
Horror in 87. Oh man.
We might have to revisit this one
Yeah.
because yeah, I don't know that like they
Because I can
who
think
oh
of
wait.
plenty of really good horror that came out in 87, but
Oh
none of
wait,
it
here
is
we go.
fucking
Wait.
Oscar
I
Have
worthy.
think
you
I
got
found
it
it.
there?
I think I have found it. 19. Oh, maybe not. Hold on.
This is where people are screaming at the thing. It's this one.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
this, you idiots. At 1987 Oscars, The Fly was
The
nominated in
Fly.
makeup.
Son of a
The
bitch, yes.
Fly. Oh.
Yeah, so makeup for that, Aliens, but it doesn't say what the third one is. So we got 2 out of 3, and if someone else fills it in or I find it later, we will figure out what the third horror movie
Answers on a
is.
postcard, right?
Um, interesting.
But
Yeah,
on, but
David Lynch was nominated for Best Director that year.
for
Blue Velvet.
does that count as a horror movie?
No, but it's
Oh,
just
okay.
nice to.
nice to go back. Nice to
It's
get
like
back
nice.
on.
it's a horror movie to me, but I don't think it's a horror movie. But go on that note, John. You
Yeah,
watched.
so obviously having some incredible time for horror and Oscar-nominated horror and films like
Yeah,
incredible films
doesn't
like The
feel good.
Substance.
Mm.
I thought I'd watch 2 rather random horror films this week, which I thought I'd
Okay.
bring to the show. The first one I watched The Class of Nukem High, which
Oh,
is a
never heard of it, I don't think. But Mark apparently loves it.
Wonderful.
He's
so
Wonderful
clapping
it
and
has
trauma
been a
and
cult
the
Yeah.
this is
classic,
filtering it out.
you know,
Okay.
traumaing beyond all
Uh,
possible
that's
traumaness.
probably I'm not a big trauma
Yeah, I think
gal.
it's probably nowhere near any of your sort of thing to watch.
What was it called?
The Class of
Class of
Nukem
Nukem
High.
High.
Like
It,
Nukem, like Duke Nukem?
Yep.
yes,
Okay.
exactly.
It
It's
follows
exactly what you think it is.
a high school in the shadow of a nuclear power plant, and the teachers are mutants, the pupils are mutants, everyone's a
Nice.
mutant, and fun ensues. We would never have got the third horror, which was nominated for an Oscar in
Oh, good, you got
1987.
it.
What was it?
Best visual effect was nominated Poltergeist 2, The Other
Oh,
Side.
Oh
wow.
yeah, no, never in a million years.
No,
would
no,
I
Never
no
in a
way.
zillion years.
No way. No way. But yeah, the Class of Nukem High. What I do find fascinating about it is just it's a real time of a type of film
Yeah.
because it is just the editing is bonkers. It is a collection of scenes of things that people thought would be funny or interesting,
Completely,
and
it's
then
like
they've just
vignettes, isn't it? It's
you've
like
just
skits.
chucked. Yeah, they just chucked them. Yeah, it's like skits. Yeah, it could be an SNL sketch kind of thing.
Mm.
And it does for a period of the film become like a connected movie. It feels like more of a movie, but either side of it, it's just. But it's almost like someone said some great visual effects in it, like worth for some of the visual effects and
Okay.
there's a great gribbly in it as we would call it for the pod, right?
Yeah.
Nice.
Which is in my vernacular now. And yeah, so but it's just this crazy, yeah, high school kind of awfully really low budget film, but it is a classic, and it's along with the
It
Toxic
is.
Avenger. It's in the same sort of
Sure.
realm
Yeah.
as that sort of thing, and it was one that I'd never got to. I just
What
thought.
a pick! What led you to pick Class of Nukem High this week?
I was trying to think, like, what could I watch that's like a bit crazy and a bit different, and just something that I hadn't ticked off that kind of 80s kind of list, which was is always shortening, and that was there. So I was just like, but actually, I think what led me to it was, I don't know how I got there, but I guess I went down like a little rabbit. The other film that I watched this week was a film called Castle Freak.
Stuart Gordon,
That's
banger.
yeah. I was
That
like,
of
okay, I
Jeffrey
know what that one
Combs
is.
and
Yeah.
Barbara Cranston,
Yep.
horror royalty, and
Wonderful.
set in Italy, so felt at home with
Oh, hey,
with
nice.
this family, my wife being Italian, and yeah, just even that, just I think something came where I was like looking down horrors. They said, "Oh, people that watch this like this." Two very different films.
Nice.
Two very different films. But I really like. I don't know if you knew about the concept of like Castle Freak, where that came from, because basically the director of the film was inspired to create the film because he saw a poster in Charles Band, the producer's office, which was of just this freak kind of being whipped in like, and it was just had Castle Freak on it, and he was like, "Oh, I'd
Sounds like
that."
something that'd be in Charles Band's office.
It does.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And he basically said like, "Oh, what is this?" He said, "Oh, you can have it. I've got no script, but you can have it. I just have one proviso. You have a castle, you have a freak." And
Fair enough.
the film very much just hangs on the fact that you have a castle and have a freak, and then you've just put Jeffrey Combs and Barbara Cranston in it, and it would be a great one for a watch along.
Oh yeah, that's a good call.
It's a bit slow in the beginning, I'd say, to get, but it's still Jeffrey Combs on screen being Jeffrey Combs and Barbara Cranston being, so you can kind of put up with it. But when it gets going, and I think it would be a fun one just to rib at and to talk
Very
about.
nice.
Yeah, worth.
You lead me to mention, in fact, watch along next weekend, folks.
That's
Watch along
right.
next weekend. Thank you for reminding me, Ben. Let's watch along next weekend. I'll put some shit on the facey about that a bit later on.
February 1st.
Yes.
Yeah, weirdly,
February
I
1st.
will be on your time for that, Corey. So I will
Hey!
see how that works.
Cool.
Yeah,
Nice midday
nice.
watch along action. Yeah, it's always nice.
But yeah, and then just the other mention I would have, which wasn't actually a film, but because I've got quite a lot into a lot of the K horror that's around at the moment. There's a lot of kind of shows, and one of the really good ones. We had things like the Sadness film, and we had like I don't know, Alice in Borderland. There was all these shows, these kind of K horror shows, Sweet Home, and all these things. But one that really stuck out to me was Happiness. I don't know if you guys have seen Happiness. Have you heard of this?
God,
sounds familiar. What's that?
No, not Sadness.
No, Happiness. Is it the one about the fucking pedo?
No.
I think my sister and mom might have watched
Happiness
this.
was a good watch. I'd give this is a good fun watch. It's a somewhat zombie flick, which I know doesn't go up your alley necessarily, but it's not actually kind of your archetypal zombies. It's because people kind of become them and turn back to normal. Which has a really good concept within the show, and it's all kind of locked within these apartment buildings in Korea, in Seoul, Korea, where it's just got a good premise, that got great 2 lead actors, worth binging through, and I had a great time with it. And it's, if you like kind of those quirky Korean kind of slightly different things, worth bashing through. Yeah, it was a good time.
Yeah, I think my mom and my sister watched this last time she visited here last year.
It's good fun.
Sorry to keep going back to the 1987 Oscars, right? But
Mark's lost in 87.
Yep.
Genre nominees were all over the place. Another nominee for Best Makeup was Legend.
Oh, Legend.
Ooh,
wow.
Fair.
Yep. A nominee for Best Cinematography, Star Trek 4. And
Nice.
Corey,
Voyage Home?
Yes, indeed. Best Cinematography.
Sure.
I mean, I guess the miniatures of the Vulcan ship over Vol. Yeah, maybe like.
You are not going to believe, Corrigan, who was co-winner for the Oscar for Best Original Song at the Oscars 1987. You ain't gonna fucking believe this.
Is it Neverending Story?
It's Giorgio Moroder.
It's Giorgio Moroder. WTF. Guys, we just had a revelation. If you recall, for our Ko-Fi 2 months ago,
director of Metropolis,
watched Giorgio Moroder, or whatever his name is, his version of the silent film Metropolis, and neither of us had ever heard of this guy until Mark earlier today was watching Neverending Story, and he co-wrote the theme. And I've only ever heard it referred to as by the person who sings it. And so I had no idea of this. I've sang this song at karaoke 1,000,000 times. Wow. No idea it was our boy. Crazy.
Amazing.
And just a rubber sing all over the place. Like just cool
as fuck.
So let's power through these so that we can have
of course.
Benners here.
I don't know why, but Owen got it into his fool head that he wanted to watch Batman Begins.
Nice.
Obviously, I'm not going to turn that down.
Right, yeah.
Watched the entire thing with a big grin on my face. And I was delighted that he stuck the whole thing out. Laura and Peter just wandered off after the first 40 minutes. Like, what the fuck is this? But Owen and me snuggled throughout the entire film, and he loved it.
I do love hearing your the kind of film experiences with the kids, because your kid's a bit
Yeah.
older than
Great.
mine. I've got a 7 and a 3-year-old, and my
Yeah.
7-year-old's kind of just starting to get into, like, she's been pretty good with films all off, but I'm just thinking now, when can I get something in?
Yeah,
When
start
can I
Yes.
get
edging
something
up.
good in? You know, like, when can I?
Yeah, I love that.
So yeah, I mean, like, Nightmare was I watched that when I was like 8, so
Yeah.
That's
in a
the
year's
thing, is like
time, is
our
that like,
times are different
yeah,
than
so
Yeah.
we treat our
And we
kids
turned out
better
fine.
than our parents. Yeah, everyone turned out great. No problem.
But Batman Begins holds up, right? Vivid memories of being in uni, right? And sitting in, well, I think I'd just finished uni, perhaps. It was 2005. And I fucking sat there in front of dial-up, right? In Aberystwyth on my fucking, my fucking Pentium PC. And I waited for what must have been 4 hours for the trailer for that fucking film
Oh,
to
I thought you were
download.
gonna say that's how you watched it. And I was like,
No, just the
what?
first trailer.
God.
I sat there and I didn't move from that fucking chair until that trailer downloaded. And
Amazing.
just great to revisit. It gets Batman so right. Delicious. What a fucking great movie. And then last night, Grafted, so which had just popped up on Shudder.
Yeah, you watched it literally the day after it came
Yeah,
out.
I looked at that yesterday. I was like, oh, interesting.
It's all right. I mean, I'll be a hack about this. What if Audition and Darkman were a movie together? It's a brilliant but traumatized Chinese what would you call her? Biology student makes incredible advances in the field of like skin grafting. She's got a birthmark and her dad had a birthmark, and she carries on his work and ends up killing people and stealing their face. And it's fun, and that's all. 2.5 stars, nothing to write home about, but a good laugh if that's the kind of thing you're in the mood for. There you go.
Love it. I had a fun little week. Well, in some ways, I watched a couple Oscar-nominated movies that I did not like. I watched Nickel Boys, based on a Colton Whitehead novel, filmed entirely in first person, and it's like if Skinamarink were a drama, I guess.
Sounds
Lots of
off-putting.
corners, yeah, lots of people's feet, lots of not being able to see what's going on. And the entire
go
time
on.
it is very clear that everyone is acting to a camera and not a human being. Hated it. Absolutely hated it. I was like trying to sit through it because the like door to the theater was in front of the screen. So I was like, if I walk out, I have to walk past everybody. But like enough people walked out before me that I was like, you know what? I'm going. So like 90 minutes in, I gave up. I was gone. Nickel Boys,
Did you
not
walk
my fave.
out?
You
Yeah, I
walked
left.
out.
I could not take any more of it. I was like, this is
Wow.
not a movie. This is like a thing that like if you were in a museum, they have like a 10-minute loop of, and you sit down to rest your knees on a bench and watch. Like that's what this felt like. But it was 2 hours
no.
and 25 minutes long. I was like, I'm not doing this.
Have you walked out of a film, Mark? Have you ever walked out of a film?
Yes, I walked out of Batman and Robin.
Oh.
Yep.
That is funny to me.
My brother and I and a friend of mine from school went to see
I
Batman
can
and
imagine your
Robin.
brother, your brother, I can imagine walking out of many a film.
Yeah.
Me and Alan walk
Like,
out of a
this
lot
is
of
not
stuff, right?
surprising.
I'm not even kidding. Me and Alan walk out of shit all the fucking time.
That's
If
true.
it
It
ain't-
is your thing.
Hit the bricks. If you're
Hit
not
the
enjoying
bricks.
it, just fucking hit the bricks. And we walked
Yeah.
out of Batman and Robin. I think I might have also walked out of Danny Cannon's Judge Dredd. I think I also split
Those are
from
funny
that.
choices. I feel like I can sit
Yeah.
through those even though like they're bad, you know. It's like enough that I'm like I can wait it out or whatever.
What about you?
Spawn. I think Spawn was
Spawn.
I like Spawn angered me, and I just noped out of the cinema in seconds.
Spawn.
That's
I was an
amazing.
angry teenager.
Spawn.
These terrible effects on Spawn. Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
I've said on here before my two were Open Water and the Hellboy that Marco likes so much.
Oh yeah,
Those are the
yeah.
two that I walked out before this one.
I'm not gonna take the bait. I'm not gonna take the bait.
I'm just stating a fact. But
I'll tell you,
I also watched Emilia Perez
Oh
this week.
jeez, I want to know about this. I need to know.
Jesus fucking Christ.
Yeah,
Like,
what is
obviously, I'm not
this?
going to get super in depth on it because,
Yeah,
again,
yeah,
we do
yeah.
need to talk to you about your work, but
Yeah, no,
it
no.
is the most baffling. This is, you know, it's been compared a lot to Crash, and I think that's the only thing that you can really do is it's like it's the same kind of, not your Crash, Mark. Crash is in
I was gonna ask.
the
Yeah.
Paul Haggis Crash that
Yeah.
notoriously won the Oscar only to within
Yeah,
like
yeah.
a couple years, everyone be like, this is white nonsense.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And Emilia Emilia Perez is very much that, a movie that tries to deal with like transness in Mexico amongst the cartels, but is made by a white French man and acted almost completely by Americans. And it is just truly with the worst music. It's a musical, worst music I've
So I've only
ever
seen,
heard.
and I was getting worried that I'm, being out of context because
Yeah,
you
the
could be
one
showing,
scene
and
that
I've seen
everyone's
this
seen.
one with Zoe Saldana,
Yeah.
kind of, the terror. It's like, is this
It's
real?
that bad through the whole movie.
Really?
Yeah, it is
I've
like
gotta
that the whole
watch it.
movie. I don't. Have you seen that clip, Mark, where
Please watch it.
she's
I wish we
learning?
could play
You
it
have
now.
to watch it. I'm sure a lot of people are laughing right now because they have watched it, and it's this scene where she is finding out about transgender surgery. And she like walks into the place. She's like, I'd like to know about transgender surgery operation. And like this whole thing is like, penis to vagina or vagina to penis. And it's like, this is legitimately a scene in this movie. And that is what the whole movie is like.
That looked
and
like
it
an
is,
SNL sketch.
It does.
That looked
It's-
that looked like something out of like.
It's the kind of thing that if you put it on SNL, people would be like, come on,
Mark,
that's too on the nose.
Mark, if I said that Vic and Bob would have done this,
fine.
You'd have known exactly where it is. It's like, yeah.
I'll take a look at that clip, perhaps.
Yeah, the last things that I watched They Live. Felt like I was in the zone to watch They Live. You can't go wrong with They Live. And if you haven't watched it in a minute,
way through it.
Yes. Exactly. If you haven't watched They Live in a minute, do yourself a favor. You know what? Like, give yourself a present and watch They Live. It's just a delightful time. I went onto the Canopy app, which is an app that you can use through your library to rent streaming movies. And they actually have a ton of horror, like a lot of independent horror on there that you would never hear of anywhere else. So I watched 2 movies on that. One was a dud, one was a lot of fun. And even the dud was okay. I watched one called Beezel, which was about it. It was like a house that was haunted essentially by this witch, and you're seeing 3 different generations of people living in this house haunted by this witch. And the first,
is she the Beezel? Is that?
That's Beezel.
Oh,
yes.
amazing! Wonderful.
And
what a name.
Ultimately, she is, she every 300 years has to impregnate a human and have a witch spawn baby. And so you're kind of watching this different thing. In the meantime, she has to feed on humans. And
is that you get Beezeled?
That's how you get Beezeled, bruh.
Okay.
And the first
Beezeled
segment is phenomenal. No notes. Loved it. The second one is quite sufficiently spooky, and the third is unwatchable. So, it starts off really strong. You could watch the first 2 as like their own independent things and have a good time with it, but the third ruins it. The other movie I watched was called Hauntology, which was it's an anthology, as you might guess from the title, and of basically this it's like a queer ghost movie, in which this girl is going to run away from home, but her sister finds her, and is like, okay, I will let you go, but first let me tell you these stories about hauntings in our town. And the girl's like, why the fuck? Okay, fine. If you'll leave me alone after that, you can tell me that. And she tells her these various stories about some sort of spirit in town that has sort of come for people who are different in some way, and like feeds off of like the trauma surrounding people being different. So they're basically all, queer people in the town who've been
nice idea.
Yeah, who've been followed by the spirit over the years, and then they all kind of circle back and connect to one another. And it was like cozy horror. It was like just the kind of thing that I like, where it's like it was like Are You Afraid of the Dark with a little more blood. I think you would probably be a little bored by it, Mark. But it was just like a really cozy, ghosty movie, with like very wholesome queer themes in it of, sort of beating the generational trauma that comes along with it and all of that kind of stuff, and looking at like queerness existing over long periods of time and going back to, the 18 or 1700s, I think, is like the first story of this. And so yeah, Hauntology, if you have Canopy and a library card, which you should if you listen to this podcast, check that out, and it's a lot of fun. And that was my week.
Absolutely fucking fun-packed week. And I will tell you that when the time comes, as surely it will soon, to sit my boys down in front of Hellboy. There's only one version I'm going to be fucking showing. And it
Can't abide it,
frankly
my darling
astounds
Marko. I
me
can't
that you would
abide it.
walk the fuck away from that. That's
No,
nuts.
I gave up.
All
Let
right,
me-
to business.
Real
Please.
quick, let me pee, and then we can
Oh,
get to
yeah,
business.
sure,
Oh yeah,
sure.
if that's an option, I'll jump in on
Yeah.
that.
Quick break. Everybody pee.
right.
Nailed it. I'm so sweaty.
both...
Look at that.
Oh, lovely.
I'm like this. My house is freezing right now. I'm like refusing to put the heating on.
Yeah. Oh man, I couldn't.
Well, it's been on. I'm
do
just
it.
not putting it on at midnight. You know.
Oh yeah. No, that
no
makes
one's gonna
sense.
thank you for that.
That's ours goes down at like 10. So for now, I'm a little overheated. All right, Mark, take us into our.
So listen, friends, you all feel it in your bones. You all see it in the world around you. We're all told it on the news. We all instinctively, intuitively know that things are wrong with the world.
Mm-hmm.
The fucking it's in the air, it's in the news, it's in the graphs are all heading a certain way. The vibe is telling us that things are wrong and that things are only going in one particular direction. So why don't we refer to our expert here? We've brought in John Benfield here, not just because he's a great bunch of lads, although undoubtedly that is demonstrably the case. But what John is bringing us here this week is that statistical rigor, that analytical layer of truth to what you all feel in the fucking bones and tissues of your body and in your being. John, I'd be grateful if you could just start by just laying out how do you interact with this concept of risk in your working life and in your professional life?
Okay, so probably good to, yeah. It's an interesting. So as I wasn't always the world I was in, so I came into this world post COVID.
Yeah,
I used to run language school. I used to,
used to teach. What languages do you speak?
We used to teach English to foreign students. So students would
okay,
come over
cool,
and we
cool,
teach them English. So that was my world for a long time, and way back in kind of the banking world. But obviously COVID put a stop to all that, and it was certainly was closed down. I went and did the thing I mentioned before a couple of times, and then I got approached by somebody who had worked for me at one point to say we need me. It was so my kind of. I'm a bit of a storyteller. I bring things to life. I'm good at making relationships and building friendships and getting trust and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And there was this consultancy company that dealt in crisis management and risk management, and most specifically business continuity. So what they do is there were a bunch of very technical people who were very good at understanding risk and modeling ideas around preparing for crisis or risk or events, and then recovering from them, because you've got that was the whole.
I like that steps involved. Yeah, just not just like
so many
noticing they're there, but like having a solution.
Yeah, so not just the solution, but then also how do you build back? How do you get back to normal after? So I came into this company with about 4 years ago now with zero knowledge of the industry or the world we were in, and then was tasked with basically kind of keeping us going and getting business and kind of making it happen kind of thing. And over the years have been involved with many clients and businesses and charities and government things that all approach risks in different way and have different risks. And about half our business, the reason I'm in the States quite a bit, is over in the United States.
We're risky. So.
Yeah. There's some interesting stuff on that, because the thing about risk is that there's different drivers to how people approach it. There's different drivers onto how the reasons people might deal with it. And sadly, and we talked about the world that we live in and the fact that the structures are broken, is that the reason people do deal with it is generally because it starts affecting someone's pocket somewhere.
Yeah.
So a lot of the risk industry, as you can imagine, is driven by insurance. Because insurance are insuring what they call everything risks, Every business is a risk. Every person is a risk ultimately, and they will sometimes highlight, hang on a minute, this business it hasn't really identified their risks or hasn't really identified, how they're going to survive if one of these things was to happen. And then you've got the other side of regulation. It's a bit more of a thing our side and a bit less of a thing in the US, although it's,
Wow.
it depends where you are, but it does happen. And then you've even got, depending on your kind of news sources. And, I've spent many a conference in the UK where it would be all talking about climate risk and climate changing and climate events and all these sort of things. And then I've been in American conferences where people are talking up saying, we've had I won't do the accent, we've had our Mark can do it later. Yeah, we've had we've had 4 hurricanes, and we don't usually have hurricanes this time of year, but there's no mention of climate change.
Right. Yeah.
We
have no way of knowing why that's happening.
You're laughed out of the room almost. And there's some slight there has been some changes, Corrigan. It has started to the needle is moving. But
that's got to be so crazy for you though, coming in here, because obviously over the years, like Mark has expressed, like kind of, this has been part of the process, learning like just how like closed off American minds are about things like that. I'm sure seeing that in person and being like, I have to talk around the obvious problem here must be bizarre.
Yeah, it is really strange. And you get businesses that are different or that have interests overseas and they have to deal with things a bit differently. And, the companies we deal with are Fortune 500 companies, and so they have to have a more global outlook. But even then, when you get down to the real nitty gritty, they're dealing with it all differently. So it's really interesting, and then just the types of risks as well. So if you think of in America, we have to think about things like disgruntled employees.
Yeah,
is a much bigger thing than it ever would be over here. Whereas over here, it might be more of it could be more of a fire or flooding risk. Depending on what the situation is, your environment changes. We do work in Mexico. That's a very different environment again. So it's really interesting that, risk is everywhere. Risk is all around us, but it's really interesting that depending on where you are, different things are driving what fixes it. Different things are driving what promotes it. Different things are driving whether it actually matters to people or not.
Right.
And so it's really fascinating. So the way we as a business will kind of look at these things is, it is all based around businesses. It's all based around economy and keeping businesses going, basically. So we tend to look at kind of business impact. So if there is a risk that's materialized, cyber attack, a fire, a flood, whatever it might be, you have to look at what is the impact of that going to be and put some sort of monetary value on that, and say, well, this is what it's going to cost, this is what it's going to do to the business, and you'll have things like RTOs, which is where the amount of time at which you can get back to operations, and the amount of time, how, so if you think of banks have very short, if something goes wrong, they have to do it. They have to fix it really quickly, otherwise it's millions lost. Whereas it could be a pharmaceutical company has 6 months of safety stock, and actually their timelines are different. But then you have those kind of maximum tolerable period of disruptions, where if it gets to this point, we're in trouble. And I think that's some of the things we're seeing with some of the climate stuff now. Like you guys have talked about it a lot. If we get to this point, it's what is the MTBD, as the term is. I don't think we really know.
What does that stand for? MTBD?
Maximum tolerable period of disruption.
Okay.
So
maximum tolerable period of disruption.
Yeah, so that's the amount of time you can go before it's almost maybe irreversible damage, or or just really catastrophizing. Like the business would really struggle to keep going. Or
I got the right end. So the MTBD is
PD.
Your window of time. Sorry, maximum tolerable time
period.
Of disruption.
Yeah.
The time between something going wrong and the time it'll take you to fix it. How
long
can that be?
Exactly. Yeah. So you're measuring all those things. So whenever you approach risk, you kind of have to think in those sorts of areas. You have to think, well, how long could this happen? If there is a terrorist attack or a an armed intruder or whatever, then you've got to get that's got to be sorted pretty quickly, right? So
Right.
that, you know, so then what you go on to next, once you kind of start understanding those bits, you go on to, well, how do you fix these things? Well, then you need people to assume roles, and you need a structure. And what tends to work well in crisis situations is a command structure. So we have to
Right.
move away. You know, Mark will know this. I think, judging from your kind of workplace and everything, is management structures is everything we have. It's all management. It's all meetings. It's all
course.
discussions. It's all
Of course.
no, out the window. That all goes out the window, and it needs to become command structures where you have very, you know, almost military-esque or emergency service-esque way of dealing with it.
Wow.
And so you have to kind of then look at, well, how do you plan for that, and who fits into those places, and then you go on to then actually what do we do, and it's all this sort of stuff that has to come into this world. So yeah, I just wanted to give a bit of a kind of, it's a big subject to
it's
go
really
into,
interesting though,
especially at 20 to midnight. But it is fascinating, but it is a very wide. But the reason obviously we got discussing was because of these reports that came out.
Mm-hmm.
Now, we often talk about, can you trust the information that's coming out and things, you know, stats can always be skewed, all that sort of thing. But genuinely, I think if you've got a report, you know, these reports are often by businesses. So the World Economic Forum report, which is the main one that you talked about last year very well, and you know, we've looked at this year as well, is built from, you know, businesses and CEOs and leadership positions of like. So I think this year was actually a lot less companies were involved. Actually, I think it was about half the amount of companies were involved in the report, which was interesting.
Which is actually the first question I want to ask. I mean, is the World Economic Forum report sourced solely on polling corporate
Yes,
sources?
there is some government input as well, or like country base input. But then there is another bit I'll talk to a bit about in a minute, of there are national risk registers that you can go see, which are super interesting if you want to kind of dig into what it means for your own country. And I'll tell you a bit of story on that in a moment. But these reports are, you know, again, it goes into our broken system of money. So the businesses are saying, actually, this stuff's going to affect us because it's going to cost us money, and it's going to start making our money, you know, affect ourselves. And in the same way, you've got the insurance risk barometers or reports. And generally, I think if you look at them and they kind of marry up, you're probably getting somewhere close, because the insurance industry is saying these are risks and we don't want to pay out for these, and the business industry is saying we're going to lose money here. Well, then you're probably getting somewhere close to understanding what's actually going to happen. And when you take into account the World Economic Forum of this year, when you look at I don't know if you remember, Corey, you saw the 2-year and the 10-year.
Mm-hmm.
And in the 2-year, they kind of split it up into economic, environmental, geopolitical, societal, and technological risks. And it was quite a mix on there. You know, everything was quite, you know, I think the number one is of the next 2 years is in misinformation and disinformation,
right?
Which I think we know is huge, and you know we've got countless
Yes.
stories on issues with that. And number 2 was extreme weather events. That was there as an environmental, but then you had things like state-based armed conflict, you know, societal polarization, cyber espionage, you know, inequality, those sort of things. But when you go to the 10-year one, I think it's 5 of the 10 spots on there are the green environmental issues. So in 2 years, there's just 2 greens. It's extreme weather events and pollution. But the 10-year one, they're saying extreme weather events, biodiversity loss and ecosystem collapse, critical change to Earth systems, natural resources shortages, and pollution are all in there.
10 years.
In 10 years.
Christ.
And so that, I think, will, you know, and when you look at that, you go, hang on a minute. So businesses, and this is US, UK, Europe, they're saying, no, this is actually going to cause us a problem in 10 years. So you don't need to go.
Like, so, I mean, just looking at it from a business perspective, it's been like the problem with fighting it has been businesses weighing this out and going, that problem is enough down the road that it is more profitable for us to pretend it's not happening than it is for us to address it. And what you're saying with this World Economic Forum thing is that now we're coming to a point where this is actually, we need to acknowledge this because it is actually going to cost us money now. It is not more profitable for us to pretend this is not happening.
Yeah, and that's we reached that MTPD, that maximum period of tolerable disruption. Has that almost naturally started going, hang on a minute, this stuff's actually real, so it's really interesting when you look through these reports, and they are worth seeing. And if you do really want to know kind of what's down the line or what things around the corner, just to give a bit of an example. So I wasn't in the business at this point, but in the years leading up to 2020, the UK National Risk Register, which you can go and see now, they've just released the 2025 one, and I'll go into a little bit about that. But what would you say was in the top 5 of that risk register for 5 years leading up to 2020?
UK.
Yes.
Communicable diseases.
It was a pandemic.
Yeah.
To a
Whoa.
flu
In the 5
virus.
years leading up to 2020.
Yes.
Incredible.
Every year on that report, that it said that a COVID type or flu type virus, it was stated, will happen in the near future.
That's disturbing. I mean, I'd heard that kind of thing was warned about,
sitting
but
online. And as a company, we were
geez.
going to businesses and talking about pandemic plans and this sort of thing. Not that what we did were very good, because nobody kind of knew what was going to happen. I'm not going to say we were right, but that was sitting there on the National Risk Register.
Right.
For years.
You've blown Mark's mind right now. For those listening instead of watching this, it's hand to head, eyes
Mark's
wide,
doing a perfect
jaw
reenactment
dropped.
of his Rick and Morty tattoo.
Yes.
It's just almost
exactly.
It was like identical.
Holy shit, Bennett.
Yeah.
That's wild. That's absolutely wild.
Yeah.
So in your estimation then, where, and this is a huge question, I'm sure, but where was the disconnect between those who had to see it coming, seeing it coming, and what actually happened, the unpreparedness and the mayhem it caused?
I think, it's tough. I think there's just this element of it hasn't happened, so it won't happen in a way. It's almost like I'll see it when I believe it. I think the money thing just comes on. No, we're all right. Actually, probably the more sensible answer is, I remember in 2001 we had the SARS kicked off quite big in China.
It did,
and there was a little scare that because I was actually part of the language school back then as well, and it actually really affected our Chinese trade at the time, because we used to get a lot of Chinese students coming over, and they just cancelled. It was like 30% of the business's turnover. Wow. So actually, as that school was starting to look at viruses and possible viruses in other countries as a proper risk, because it was like, this could affect our business. But I don't think that had impacted enough. So you obviously we had SARS, kind of was contained in China to a point, and then you had swine flu, or the pig flu that came about, and all these other ones. And then there was some sort of bird flu one
my roommate and I, when I was a freshman in college, used to always scare each other up bird flu every day.
But this was the thing. So I think they'd kind of come and gone and not really taken hold. So I think a lot of people, I can even remember sitting around a room pre-COVID when the discussion came up about when it was the first things happened in Wuhan, and it was like we were sitting around going, kind of like, we've been through this, we think it's going to be okay. I think it's just that. I think it was just the pact of people just getting a bit too comfortable, and I think it's probably exactly linked to how we've been with the climate effects and those changes, because people just probably say, well, we keep saying it's going to come and it's not really happened, but it's not a sudden thing. It's like a gradual thing, isn't it? It's like a frog in boiling water, right?
That's it. And is there truth in the point that Corey made just there a few moments back, that it's less of a economic impact to pretend it isn't going to happen than to actually prepare for it happening?
Yeah, I think 100% that. Yeah, it's right now. So I think to lead on to that, the UK National Risk Register now, which you can go on to and have a look at and see, their biggest thing that they think is like the highest risk, basically, and the most likely thing. Well, first of all, one of their highest things on there is a pandemic still.
Right.
Okay, great.
Yeah,
Yeah. Well,
interestingly.
obviously, yeah, we're obviously with like the current bird flu, there's chances of that sort of breaking containment and whatnot. And, there's always various things coming up that they're like, yeah, if this hits the wrong way, another pandemic.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. It can, and also because now we've seen the economic fallout from that, it's
Yeah,
now like, oh,
we
okay, that's
won't do
actually, you know,
anything. We won't lock down or anything like that. If
yeah,
there's
yeah, yeah.
another pandemic, we'll just let it kill people.
Yeah, and then the UK, one of the biggest things and the biggest things they're worrying about, both in insurance and like from government, is flooding. Like,
Mm,
and if with the climate change for UK, flooding is like off the
Yeah.
charts of what it's going to do. It's I just see if I can find um what I had in some stats that I had about flooding. I think it was something in the region, and I'll give you links, Corey, of things that I've talked about
oh,
and
thank you.
everything.
Much
I'll send
appreciated.
them all over to you. I think it was something like 8 million properties in the UK will suffer new flooding
Oof.
in the next like 5 years or something like that. And these are new these are people that haven't been flooded before, haven't had
Right.
involved in flooding, and this is going to come from surface water that's rising. All these lakes and streams and marshlands and things that we're sitting on. The water's going to rise from constant bad weather or flash floods and things like that.
Mm.
Um, and that is a real worry because of the way with insurance industry, we work quite heavily in the insurance industry, and they're panicking about that, and they're starting to now talk to all of their businesses and say, you need some plans for this, or you need to think about what the impact of that's going to be, and you need to do it. And so it's the second it starts hitting, like I said, second it starts hitting someone's pocket, things start
Right.
moving, and you start getting somewhere.
I mean, we're dealing with that now. Obviously, I talked before about my basement being destroyed by the hurricane and all of that stuff. But even before that had happened, we were dealing with anytime sort of a big storm came through, we were experiencing flooding. And my grandmother lived in this house for, 70 years
Mm,
and had it flood like twice, one during a hurricane that took out Hurricane Sandy, which took out a lot of New Jersey, and like once years before that. But it's become like a regular occurrence now. And this has become an issue with like people and their insurance around here. It's like, well, you live in a flood zone now, essentially. So will the insurance even cover you for something like that? Because now you have basically assumed the risk of moving into a place that
mhm,
floods, even though this isn't a place that should flood. That is fully just a result of the changing climate over the
mhm,
years and the severity of the storms and the soil not being able to keep up with it and the foundations of our homes not being able to keep up with the amount of groundwater that is accumulating as a result of this. Because it literally comes straight through the walls and up through the floor. This is not supposed to happen. And so, like, the idea of that is very familiar to me
mm,
and to a
mhm.
lot of the people who live around me. And I guess now Brits are facing the same sort of things that, we're dealing with. You don't have to live next to a body of water
Nope. No,
for
no, not
for
at
this
all.
to happen.
No, no, no. There's all sorts of streams and lakes or just areas of the country that they call like dark. I think the insurance industry names them as like black zones or dark zones. I can't remember. And they're just like, that's going to flood there, and if we
Right.
get this
Mm.
weather continues, it's going to flood. And so it's really, I think in America, I think in the World Economic Forum they talk about 100 billion dollars annually just to kind of extreme weather events or something like that,
Hmm.
ranked that. So it's huge.
Yeah.
And obviously we've got these risks of fires and floods which we've had for years, so we kind of are better prepared for them.
Hmm.
um, and obviously more of a newer one is things like cybercrime is obviously
Right.
huge. That's the number one risk kind of globally around any country, is cyber, again because it's people targeting businesses, so that
Hmm.
becomes the top risk in everything. And with any of these things, it's always about trying to find out how you deal with it or how you look at it. But what I found interesting in these reports was that obviously you have okay, you have cyber, and you have extreme weather events, and you have maybe terrorism, and then you have pandemic, and you have these kind of things that we now know, but then you have these like emerging risks that I thought were quite interesting as well. Some of these new risks that I thought might be a bit better for this to kind of think on. And obviously, you guys have talked about AI a lot, you know, and the problems and the problematic things around it. And it is a real risk. You know, I recently completed a master's alongside my work, and my project was around the risk in AI. And it was about, you know, how you, because basically we don't have a choice. Everywhere's going to be using it. It's already on our phones. It's already on our computers.
Increasingly,
every day we're getting a new app that says they're using AI. It's just, you know, we're just not going to
no
get
way to shut it off anymore. It just is there.
It's just there. It just is there. So it was like, okay, well, if we're going to have to embrace this in some ways, then we need some models to actually understand how to do that, you know. So there are some very good models out there, like ethical AI models that help you kind of understand how best you can use it, or, you know, and that covers all things from the risk of climate issues, you know, just the sheer amount of, you know, energy and water and all these things that it uses to use AI. But then also the risks around, I don't know, Corey, did you ever come across in your kind of AI research the issue in Denmark around the housing associations and the using AI?
I don't think so. Have you
It's a
seen
new
that,
one on
Mark?
me.
No, I don't
Okay,
think
so
so.
basically, to kind of cut it short, in Denmark, so the Danish Welfare Authority basically used AI tools to help fight fraud within their systems. And what it ended up doing was, obviously, it became just almost, you know, fueled mass surveillance, basically. And there's a huge piece on this on Amnesty International that you can look at. But what it started doing was, because of the inherent bias in the setup of it, it basically was just flagging anybody that was not of kind of white Danish origin as fraud. And then was like destroying families and ruining lives and having people almost deported. And it was, you know, and it was just, it completely went off. It actually almost wiped out the entire, you know, a lot of the government department that was doing this part, because they created this effective mass surveillance social benefit system that just targeted minorities, basically.
Right. I mean, it's the thing that everyone, you know, that people of color and marginalized people keep on like shouting about, right? Like, you know, we've talked about it since the beginning of this in sort of a benign way, but how like my camera would always try to focus on like a white man on a pillow behind me instead of me, right? It's like, oh, we'll look for any white man instead of a black person to focus on, and recognizing that algorithms and things like that are biased, you know, they are not neutral in any way. And so if the stuff that they're trained on it comes from a place of bias and things like that, that's not just going to be like, oh, the machine's smart enough to filter that out. It's going to continue doing that. And here we've seen that in like workplaces that use AI to sift through like resumes and shit like that, just straight throwing out anything that has a name that sounds black on it or something like that. You know, if your name is Shaniqua and you try to apply for a job, good fucking luck, because the algorithm is just going to filter you out from the beginning of it. So we see that in other places too.
I mean,
Fellas, sorry, mate, go on.
No, you go.
I'm fascinated with, from your perspective, right? From where you sit and as intimately kind of involved as you are with just risk on the whole, and with different kind of vectors of risk. Where do you think the breakpoints are socially, economically, in terms of community, in terms of just the kind of the structures that we all live and work around in our day-to-day lives? What do you think will be, if we take that 10-year thing as an example of climate catastrophe worsening and becoming more pronounced as an example, and not just climate, but all of these other various risks in the World Economic Forum report, what do you think are going to be the structures that will kind of show the most pronounced damage first?
I think, I mean, it will be, I mean, again, this will be different depending on the country, I guess, or
I
think in the UK, I think it will be massively led by the insurance market. I think the insurance market will, as more and more businesses are failing to recover from flooding or cyber attacks or or especially climate related things, or AI issues, with the AI acts coming, the EU AI Act coming in, which is going to start regulating and start charging people for data loss or misuse or wrong use of AI. Again, the second they all start getting hit and people's shares and stocks start going down, they'll make a change. But it's just whether or not it's in a climate sense, is it in the right time? So yeah, sadly, I mean, it's horrible to say, but it always kind of comes back to that thing of, it's when it affects. Oh gee.
Oh no.
Oh no.
Oh no.
He goes
back in the room. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
My laptop, being midnight, our IT department does updates on our laptops at midnight, and it just went, we were updating and shut me down. I didn't realize in the background they were doing that. So,
oh wow.
Yeah, it was
That's
just literally
wild.
like, I'm out, I'm done. So it just went. So I switched onto my phone now.
That's bananas.
I was like, battery's good, everything's good, and then I was realized, oh no, you've done a external update. So sorry for that. But yeah,
can you connect headphones to your thing, or is it the?
I've got my.
Oh, you've got it. Okay, cool.
Yeah, I've got these. Okay, can you hear me? Okay.
Yeah, you sound fine. I just wanted to make sure.
As long as it hasn't changed the sound too much.
No, I think you're fine.
So yeah, I think that's the case with the climate thing. Like I said before, with in the United States now, we're starting to see a bit of a change in the reaction to it. So I've seen it just in the last few years of where it was completely ignoring it, but now it's actually happening so regularly that there's a hurricane coming in a time when there shouldn't be hurricanes, or a fire coming in a time when there shouldn't be fires, and it's now it's causing this issue. So yeah, that's going to be the big kicker for it. I mean,
go ahead.
Go on.
Well, I was just going to ask, sort of as a accompanying Marko's question here, of like, kind of, where does the shit hit the fan next? Because what you're doing is like risk assessment and then trying to figure out how to mitigate these risks. Is there also, amongst these like many areas you name, pandemics, AI, insurance, all these kinds of things, something that you feel like it's hit that point of all those letters, the maximum time or whatever, it's hit that point that you think that they are actually like, all right, we're fixing this now, and we have some chance of getting ahead of one of these dangers that is hitting us right now? Is there anything that we haven't let hit the fan?
Yeah, I think the technological ones. I think actually, when it comes to things like cyber and things like AI, I think we react to them quite well. Actually, I think, as a we're very aware, and you could say terrorism. Okay, it's not to say it doesn't happen, but I think the preparedness, which is a big word of in the industry, the preparedness against those sorts of things, because they've been sitting on the risk registers for a long time, is actually pretty good. It's actually pretty good, because we've kind of experienced it, we've looked at it, and we've kind of either models or understanding of how to deal with it. And so those sorts of things, I think in America, with the work done around that kind of armed intruder stuff, those sorts of ones have. But I would definitely lean to technological ones tend to be better. It's when it's, I guess that could be because there was money to be made out of it. I don't know.
Right.
I sound really cynical, don't I? But I think that is
no.
Yeah, because all of a sudden you can go, well, actually, okay, we can have a company that's got cyber experts in this particular area, consultants, and breeds business. So I think all the time it's breeding some sort of extra business. It's worthwhile, and it actually leads me a little bit onto one of the ones I thought was a little bit more kind of out there, and a bit different, and which was about in the World Economic Forum, and I think it's in the National Risk Register as well. Yeah, is severe space weather.
Oh, so like mass coronal ejections and shit.
Yeah, like just the idea of I met a friend of mine who's a doctor in Rome. He worked on a lot of the vaccines and things for COVID, and he's a super intelligent guy. And one of his friends, I don't know what was in the water. They're from Rome actually, but his company is set up literally to deal with like possible space debris, and they're like looking at how do we sort the issue of junk in space, effectively.
Yeah.
Because if you think of it this way, so you should think about how bad a job we've done in the UK of actually, or sorry, UK in the world of dealing with rubbish.
Mm-hmm.
Just think about how bad it is in space.
Right.
Because especially in near orbit space, because space is huge. But think
Mark's
about
like,
near orbit
I
space.
think that space could do more rubbish.
No, not in near orbit space though. And that's the issue, because it's not actually in space, it's actually
right.
kind of
Yeah,
just
yeah, yeah.
above our planet.
Upper
You know,
atmosphere.
just above it. Yeah, it's not really space. So I noticed that there was this, space debris thing, and I thought, okay, that's a bit interesting. I'll dig a bit more into that. And I could see that, I don't know if you saw that, because of commercial space industry booming now, and I think there was something like at one point there was 15 or 20,000 satellites were sent up between a certain amount of time,
Right.
but only something like a quarter of them are actually still being used, or, the ones that sent up in recent years, and they're
Right.
all actually just floating around dead.
Nice.
So what happens is things collide, things
Right.
end up. There's cases of Chinese stuff falling down in Southern California. A piece of space junk fell for a 2-story home in Florida, that was confirmed to have come from the International Space Station. Several fragments
from the ISS.
Yeah. Several fragments of SpaceX capsule was found on a Canadian farm.
Wow.
The family are now suing NASA for damages, which is an interesting one. That might change the view on it all.
Wow.
So because over 60 years, there's more than 6,000 space launches, and that's put 56,450 trapped objects in orbit.
Jesus Christ.
And only 8% of those 56,000 are actually active space satellites. The rest is just junk.
It's just junk in near Earth orbit.
Yeah, which has created this thing called the Tesla syndrome, which is this. It's a scenario which a volume of debris, and I'm reading this because I wanted to get it right. A volume of debris in the Earth's orbit reaches a critical threshold, which then triggers a cascading effect, which then collisions with other debris, creating more junk, and then just effectively hitting the planet. And in June last year, actually, a defunct Russian satellite broke up into almost 200 pieces of debris, forcing the astronauts on the ISS to take cover and prepare, and to evacuate and all that sort of thing.
Wow.
So there's
as
all
if
these
they're not dealing with enough on there already.
Yeah, exactly. And when you actually start looking at, because the value of the reuse value of space debris is actually supposed to be something in the trillions. Like you could actually collect this and reuse it,
and use it.
Yeah, which is what this colleague of my friends is kind of, I think, looking at effectively. But a lot of people were just looking at it as just too expensive to do effectively. But there was this a rocket separation ring fell at this Kenyan village in December last year, 30th December 2024. This huge metal separation ring just dropped.
I think I did see that one. Yeah.
So that's a risk that is really growing, and I think, where did I read the stat of what they're predicting? It was quite staggering, the numbers that they're predicting. Obviously now with everyone's favorite Nazi Elon Musk, what he's projected to do, and SpaceX and all these other ones. The amount. If you think of what we did between the 60s and now,
right,
of sending stuff to space, and what we're going to do from now for the next 20, 30 years, those numbers are going to be completely different.
It's crazy to me, again, just thinking from the perspective of what you do and sort of looking at risk and stuff like that, that at some point it was decided that we would just send shit up there and deal with whatever the consequence of that was later. From every perspective, whether that's cost or environmental or whatever the case may be. I mean, we see this with the Boeing shit too, right?
It's even
how
more
many
sinister
people
than that.
Yeah.
I think it's more a case of we'll send shit up there and someone else will.
Right. It's not going to be our problem. Right.
Yeah.
But like you see this with like talks of what's happened with Boeing, right? Like how many people can they let die, basically? How many accidents can they deal with and pay out with that balancing out from like versus fixing the planes instead, right? But like the idea of our whole planet just being like surrounded by thousands and thousands of bits of space junk and just kind of being like, it's occasionally gonna like hit a village in Kenya.
Yeah.
And who knows, because we've never done this before, what it does to our planet itself, but it's cheaper and easier for us to just leave it like that. Like, what the fuck?
Yeah, and I just found out, so there's projected launches. So by 2030, so it's 5 years' time, there's over 100,000 new satellites that are expected to be launched. So that's because of things like SpaceX, and Starlink, and Amazon's Cooper, or whatever they're called.
Right.
And so all these things, and that's without all the other stuff that's going.
How do they
But it's
even like
going.
get to space after this, right? Like, is there a point where you fill the sky up with so much junk that there's no like pathway for you to even get
And
out of
that,
here? How are they going to get to
and
Mars?
I think there are two issues there, because obviously there's the thought of which I think I had the same sort of reaction as Mark, where I was like, oh, space is pretty big, when you know the volumes of
Yeah.
space. But the issue is it's actually not space. It's
Right. It's
our
here.
It's
um,
Yeah.
and the thing is, so when you look at risk, and if you look in the national risk rate of the UK, you'll see like a crossed square, and they will place risk in different things which will be like low likelihood, high likelihood, low impact, high impact,
versus
basically.
Yeah. And
Yeah, so
quadrants. Yeah.
yeah, in quadrants and everything. So, and what you do then is, though, you've got there's always going to be risk prioritization. So there are um, things that are like catastrophic and like highly risky. You're going to focus on quickly, right? You're going to try, because if it's an immediate impact and it's very high, you're going to try and get, just the nature of humanity is that we're going to try and fix that one first. But if
Right.
some things like, now the thing is, I think a study happened a couple of years ago. I found it on the BBC, and I'll send the link that I found just so we got. But it was that I think the chances of getting hit by some sort of space debris was like 1 in a trillion or something like that.
Sure.
Hey, you
Right.
can still be the one, right?
Right.
But I
That's
think
not much comfort for the one person who does get hit by the space debris.
that number has already drastically dropped, and we've already found just in the last year kind of 5 or 6 cases that I quickly found. I didn't even have the chance to go into it more.
Right.
Of some serious. So these sorts of emerging risks of things like that, AI, space debris, how we deal with them is going to be really interesting. And if you assign to those risks the same models and importance that you do a fire or a flood, then you're probably going to be all right.
Yeah.
We'll probably be fine. The
Right.
issue is because there is always that mentality of, hey, it's kind of okay, or unless someone can make some money out of it.
Like we as people have a different sense of the priorities here than the corporations who are in charge of actually stopping this stuff from happening to us.
Yeah. So it's a big subject to look into, and I think America's actually very good in some like personal resilience, and you have a lot of whenever I'm there, I'm talking to a lot of the guys that give a lot of things for houses to have, like you put your documents in a pack and you have a ready bag ready and all those.
Yes.
I think we're pretty good at that out there, right? And I remember
I think we talked about that a couple weeks ago. In fact,
you did actually, yeah. And I was in New Orleans last year, and they were talking about a lot of the obviously, I mean, geez, there was a whole different mindset of seeing the risk, the kind of hurricane effect still kind of ongoing.
Yes.
But I remember them talking about the simple thing of telling people to have like an axe in your loft, in your attic, because you could, the people that survived were the ones that, if you look back at
onto the roof,
they could hack through their roof, So, and there's some really simple things when you're dealing with risk that you can do, which just make it a lot easier to deal with after. So that's like, I'm thinking of what we do specifically, and it's something we can try and do with you guys at some point, and maybe maybe we pull a few people from the pod in, and we can do a bit of big thing. But we try and scenario it. We say, okay, we go into a business and we will play out some of their top risks. So after we've analysed the business, understood what their top risks are, we'll build them a plan. But then we'll actually like war game. We'll go. We're going to pretend
Yeah.
this is happening. And we'll have videos and cut scenes and make it really as realistic as possible.
Yeah.
And that's when you really realize how people are going to react in a scenario, because you don't know
Right.
until something happens, right? So that's why when you've had a pandemic and then all of a sudden people are like, okay, well, we could feel like we can kind of deal with this now, or to a point, because we've gone through it before, or we can get up and running quicker. So you need to kind of think through, okay, well, what would I do if this happened? Okay, well, I would do
Right.
this and do that and do that. And would that work? Okay, yes, it would. And that's what we kind of play out on it. So yeah, you can be prepared. And I think when it's better to analyze it, understand the risks that are apparent to you, and then you can prepare for it and deal with it. I think that's why
Yeah.
these reports are pretty good, because you can see what's affecting your region.
Right.
They're
Mhm.
broken down to regions, they're broken down to countries. You can see what's coming down the line. It could be in workplaces that people could look at their own risk of, what's my job? Is my job something that could be affected by
Yeah,
something
totally.
else that's coming out? Manufacturing firms might be saying, okay, all these flood risks, all of our sites are in cheap property areas. They were cheap because they were in these dark zones, and now is that
Right.
an issue? Car dealerships, they've got EV batteries sitting on all their sites now.
Mhm.
Huge fire risks,
Yeah.
all sorts of things. Businesses with the AI, looking at the AI thing. Have you heard about the deep fake Hong Kong story? Do you know about this story?
No, I don't
This
think
is, I
so.
think, yeah, I think
No.
you would have got it from that. But basically, there was this guy that was taken onto a call for his business, and it was with his leadership team, and they were having a
Oh, and it
discussion.
spoofed his fucking managing
They
director's voice and then got access to
not just
God
the
knows
voice,
what. No.
faces, everything, got him to transfer millions of dollars, and it was deepfake. They had social
Wow.
engineered the leadership team, so that's where they've gone and learned every little thing about their lives and mannerisms and everything. Then managed to get an appointment with one of the key personnel. Deep fake, so the people on the boardroom looked like it was them, but it wasn't them.
Wow.
And they actually defrauded them out of tens of millions of dollars. And so that's a
That's
new,
wild.
completely new risk that was never a
Yeah.
thing before. But a simple thing you could prepare for something like that is, okay, we need to have some sort of secret
Right.
Code words.
set of
Yeah.
words, whatever
Dual
it might be.
factor, don't be
Yeah.
a deep fake
Yeah, yeah,
sort of
yeah. Could you look
authentication.
to the left for me so I could see if it wobbles
Right.
or whatever? But have those things pre-prepared. And then and like we had a really fascinating chat from someone who's like our top drone expert in the UK. But he was saying, like, some of the drone issues are becoming quite a big issue in the UK, and that could be because of spying. It can be because of just people being idiots. It could be
Like the
a number
people
of
who
reasons.
flew their drones into planes trying to fight the fires in Southern California.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, or people. There was the Gatwick thing here, Mark. I don't know if you remember, with drones
Yeah,
in the
sure.
airspace and all that sort of thing. But he was saying, like, there's some really simple things you can do. Get some binoculars and get a really bright light. You can get like one of these like super lights of Amazon, and that is a binocular, that is a drone. Okay, I'm going to shine this bright light at it. It's not going to be able to record anything. So there's
Right.
always simple fixes to a lot of even the biggest risks. It's just the
Being
understanding it
aware and
first.
being ready as much
So
as you
what
can.
as people who don't have the power that these corporations do to actually like solve the problems, what we can take from this list is kind of what forms of preparedness do we need to be taking for the various things that it is saying are on the horizon for us, beyond our Americans and our go bags and stuff like that. We're used to a degree of that kind of risk, but looking at these things on here, how do we protect our data? How do we protect ourselves from deepfakes? How do we protect ourselves from space debris? I don't know about that, but like basically that's what we can take then as individuals, right? Is like, now we know what the corporations are worried about. What steps can we at least personally do to protect ourselves from becoming victim to that, to the degree that that's possible?
Yeah, it's and it's how fast you go, because you can have the mindset of, which, and I do. I'm an easy guy. I kind of just go with the flow of things. I take
Right.
things as they come. I don't worry much about things really. I'm not that kind of mentality.
That's funny.
Probably a good
last
thing.
night.
Yeah.
Yeah, we showed that. But it was, but when you start actually thinking about these things, what I started, because a lot of people say, oh, but do you really want to listen, talk about those things with them? I'm like, well, yeah, actually, because I like to know, I'd rather know
Yeah,
than
right.
not know kind of thing. So,
Yeah.
but I mean, across, if we're going to focus on 2025, obviously the geopolitical stuff is huge.
Mhm.
With that still, although apparently, I don't know, did you see the BBC News alert come up before, Mark, about apparently
We're all friends now. Yeah.
Starmer has saluted Trump and his
His
role in
role
the
in bringing
ceasefire.
about. Yeah.
Of course. Everyone is
So,
just going to
yeah,
let
Just
Trump throw us
What's
all
the
in
word?
camps.
Capitulation. It's
Yeah.
just
yeah,
capitulation from everyone involved.
Yeah, everyone's just going to be very civil
Craven.
about it and watch it happen.
Yes.
Just
Yes.
destroy the environment and
yeah. So that, but obviously that's a huge one. And then obviously, but the misinformation and disinformation is huge.
Yeah.
That is one of the top risks for 2020. That is going to be the constant all the way through 2025. And that might be one you asked before about, are there any that we've dealt with? Well, that might be one that we're gone way over the line on. It's just, and that's my personal opinion.
It's gone too far. How do we put that back in the bottle?
How do you change that now with every way everything is and who's in control of what? And we've gone well beyond the Murdoch newspapers of UK, which was one thing. But now we've gone well beyond that, where people are literally getting fed algorithmic based information.
Mm-hmm.
How do you, barring kind of an EMP shutdown?
Yeah, right. Exactly.
Yeah. So that might be it. But that's what So we talk a lot about you saying about stats and statistics. Well, it's all there. This is all based off of science, off of people that know this is going to affect them. The national risk registers are usually based a bit more scientifically. The economic forum ones are usually a bit more kind of business led, but they tend to say the same things when you merge them together. They say the same things. So yeah, it's but you can plan, you can prepare, and you can fix these things. So we're just going to start.
Well, look, I've as you've been talking, John, I've had the UK risk register open in front of me, and that matrix that you talk about severity versus likelihood is fucking fascinating. And there's one that sticks out a mile as being pretty likely and massively catastrophic, and that's pandemic. But I mean, then you think about the politics of a second pandemic, and how that misinformation that you speak about will play into national and global reactions to another pandemic. It's almost it's in and of themselves, each of these factors that you've talked about are huge, but the intersectionality of risk is another matter entirely. How does misinformation play into threat response? All and at half midnight we'll bring it to a close, but
yes, but we will have you back to talk about more things.
Please.
One of the things
what I'd love to do I did have an idea of a scenario that we could do for you guys, but it's a bit difficult just with two people, and I thought maybe we could bring in some other aspects of it. Maybe we could work something out. So yeah,
I would be down. Yeah. Another thing I think would be really fun to just run by you one of these days. Mark and I often argue over our zombie survival strategies, and I would love to know how you would assess those. So maybe we can also have that as have you back and run some things by you on that as well.
Well, I have an American friend who's in the industry. She's based in I think like Twin Falls somewhere. Is that Montana? So I think she's Montana anyway.
That sounds like a Montana name.
Yeah.
I think it's Idaho. Twin Falls is Idaho, I believe.
Sure, it could be Idaho.
Maybe. But she actually did one, and as an expert, as the full-on kind of, I do this day in, day out, I'm delivering this stuff all the time. So maybe I can rustle up what she did. It's actually quite an interesting plan. But obviously, it's a lot easier for you guys over there. We're just throwing records at
Yeah, right, exactly. Thank you so much for coming and walking us through this. This has been phenomenal, Mark. I think you would
Yeah,
agree.
listen, 100% concur, John.
Sorry if I was going quick, but I was trying to crush a lot in, and it's a lot of
Of course.
information.
Great.
There's a lot
Yes.
of detail.
Now, your time and expertise are exactly what we need to give. Just like I said, a little bit of a layer of credibility to our anxiety. But it's
You are
good to know that personal.
justifiably anxious. Like, is that right?
Yeah.
Good. Okay. Well, that's something, I guess. And friends, listen. This is by no means the last we'll see and hear of Benner's, but my takeaway is get an axe, get a fucking torch, get educated. They're
Yes.
risk fucking, they're
Right
very
there.
clear, very credible.
It's right there.
Outlines and warnings and indicators that you can read and that you can study and that you can learn from. So don't say we didn't fucking warn you.
Here, here. And of course, the biggest thing that you can take away that will guide you through all of your struggles and anxieties in this world is that you need to stay spooky.